Yo guys, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we're going to be reviewing the debate between Khalil Andani and Sam Shamoun. Yeah, inshallah, we're going to be going through past the intro and probably skipping the questions and answers section. But yeah, I've already watched the debate and very clear that Sam's, purporting a view that's just completely indefensible. We've had multiple debates already from multiple different perspectives. We had John Fontaine debating Avery, so we had myself debating Chris, and now we have Khalil and Danny debating Sam Shamoun. And every time it's just very clear that this claim of a quote unquote Islamic dilemma just doesn't work. It's really working with straws here because you're going to find, like, within this debate as well. I mean, obviously, the vast majority of Muslims wouldn't consider Khalil and Dani as a Muslim, but that's not the main topic of this debate. Like, I don't want to see any comments or people discussing this. The main topic will be the academic perspective he provides in defense of the position that we would agree with, right? So whether he's a Kafir or Muslim or not is really, it's irrelevant to what we're discussing. We're just talking about the content that he provides in terms of argumentation for our position, because obviously the position that he is defending is pretty much what would align with what I was defending against Chris for the most part. So yeah, I did delete and unlist some of my old videos just for the sake of getting them re-edited and having the thumbnails reworked, etc. So just for that reason, I unlisted most of them. But yeah, slowly, inshallah, they're going to be back up. If you really need them, you can DM me on Instagram. And yeah, I could send you the link, inshallah. But yeah, without further ado, we can start the debate review. I'm going to skip Khalil's intro statement just for the sake of this not being too long. Is there an insect in the background? I can hear an insect on the inside. No, it's probably from outside. Is it very loud or not really? Yeah, I wouldn't know how to. Okay, let me try to lower the mic volume. Yeah, I don't know why my mic's getting all the background noise. Okay, inshallah, like, you guys are just gonna have to deal with it, but I'll try to fix it in the meantime, but we'll just continue the video from now.
The decisive criterion to interpret and recover the correct meaning of the Bible. So in that sense, I believe Muslims are clearly able to answer the Islamic dilemma. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Cameron, for allowing me to be part of this.
Sure.
All right. So at this point, we're about to turn to open dialogue, and this portion will last. We'll see. I mean, like I said at the beginning of this stream, we are gonna, at least the plan is to take questions. So if you'd like to send those again, try to send them as super chats. I anticipate getting quite a number of questions for my two guests. We've got 1,300 people watching right now, but looks like we've only got about. Yeah. So would describe the.
Dr. Andani, he's a professional academic, so. I love his approach. And the one thing I want to say is, in your articulation Islamic dilemma, I don't know if you're aware that when you say the Quran contradicts the Bible and therefore can't be confirming it, that's part of our dilemma. That's actually part of the argument. So this is why when you're saying these statements that the Quran cannot be confirming everything that's with them because it contradicts it, this is what our argument is. It assumes that it's in agreement with those scriptures, but it contradicts them, and hence the Quran is not a revelation from God. Now, I don't know if you're arguing as an academic or you're arguing as a theologian, because when I heard your presentation with Paul Williams, you said you can approach the Quran from two perspectives. Either you can approach it academically, descriptively, and see what the Quran says, or you can approach it from a theological position. From what I heard in your presentation, there was a combination of both. You're assuming that the Quran is revelation, so that if the Quran contradicts the scriptures are wrong. But now let us try to be neutral. Let us not approach it theologically, academically. So when it says confirming all that is with them, you stated, well, that means would it confirm even the apocryphal gospels? Well, that's your dilemma. That's not my dilemma. That's the dilemma that you have to resolve, because there's nothing in the passages you cited, and I have a whole list of them. I can share my screen. And since you went to pre-modern tafsir, and part of your arguments is that you included Sunni tafsirs, I'm going to include them as well. So my question to you is, since the Quran says it confirms what is with them and doesn't qualify it, how do you know that the apocryphal gospels are not inspired? That's your burden. That's your dilemma. So how do you know they're not inspired?
You want me to answer?
Yes, I'm waiting for it now.
Okay, so the first thing is the Islamic dilemma is a dilemma. It's called the Islamic dilemma because it's an argument that Christians present to Muslims, and it actually assumes a Muslim belief in the Quran. So to answer the dilemma, I have to take a position as a Muslim, which I happen to be. But when we mince over what is the correct meaning of the Quran, because that's what the dilemma comes down to. The dilemma comes down to you guys interpret certain verses some way, I interpret verses another way. So I appeal to critical historical scholarship on the Quran because that is a good indicator of what the Quran means in its own context, just like we would do the same to a critical historical scholarship on the Bible, right? So
yeah, I don't want to cut you off. Yeah, so now you're now arguing.
Your question.
Yeah, but you're arguing theologically now. So you're going to come in as a Muslim, because I was listening to your presentation. That's why I'm going by what you said with Pauline. Yeah. So now that you're answering it theologically, since you assume the Quran is revelation, and I assume it isn't. So now the argument of the Quran is to convince the Jews and Christians this prophet is a prophet in the line of the prophets that came before him. And what he has confirms what is with them. And that's one of the arguments he gives, that they should take what he has seriously because it comes from the same source. So now, since you're saying that if we take this, and by the way, I need to screen share. I don't know if, can we screen share? Because I want to show
we can definitely make that happen. So just start sharing your screen and I'll get it pulled up.
Yeah, if we can bring this up. Can I scroll down, or does he have to?
No, you.
Are you admitting then that this statement is referring to the scriptures in the possession of the Jews and Christians, which would be the New Testament? But you're now assuming that it doesn't confirm all of it, but some of it, because for you to go to chapter 2, verse 116 and 117 to show that it denies that Allah has a son, therefore this cannot mean it confirms everything. So that implicitly affirms that the Quran is acknowledging the New Testament and the Old Testament, but not all of it. So earlier you said that the Quran does not at all acknowledge the New Testament. It's aware of it, but doesn't acknowledge it or even appeal to it. So what are you saying exactly here?
So I said earlier, and if you look at the graphic that I had posted earlier, right? So I said,
yeah. So just for the sake of making it clear for people that missed out on the intro, because I'm not going to include the intro, I'll just summarize quickly on what his position actually is. So Khalil's position is very similar to my one and many other people, to be honest. I think this is the majority view on the Injil. The majority view on the Injil is that Jesus, peace be upon him, came with the Injil, and it's not the writings of, other people that might have came later. So his preachings that you would find generally across like the four gospels, that would be considered the Injil. Like that's the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed to Isa alayhi salam during his preachings on earth. So that's what the Injil is. And yeah, that's what Khalil is going to be defending, not outside of the Gospels where you have other New Testament writings from Paul and other people and so on. By the way, is the audio better as well, or is the audio still the same? Okay. Dean, you wouldn't be able to refute Sam. Hate to break to you, dude. I mean, I don't mind. I already tweeted out to him one time for a debate, and he just ignored it, despite him saying that he would debate me and demolish me. So I don't know. I could debate him on this topic, but yeah, it's up to him. I really don't mind. I could debate anyone that holds to his position. I really don't mind. It's better? Okay, that's good.
that what the Quran confirms in the case of Christianity is.
By the way, I can pull that back up if you want to share. It's up to you. If it's
okay. So Sam, if you recall, in one of my slides, I had a diagram, and I said what the Quran confirms is the gospel taught by Jesus. That's how it defines the gospel. It doesn't define the gospel as writings about Jesus, and it doesn't define the gospel as a 27-book New Testament canon. Do you agree?
Yeah, but I'm not referring to the gospel. That was part of your argument. And I agree with you that the gospel that the Quran mentions is given to Jesus. But my argument goes beyond that. It doesn't just speak the gospel of Jesus, right?
That's fine. That's fine. So just for starters, though, the definition of gospel in the Quran is the message of Jesus. It's not the New Testament.
Okay, so you want me to... I mean, I can address it, yeah, but see, that's not solely my argument. I
No,
agree.
I know it's not your sole argument, but that's a
I know
premise
it's
for my answer.
revelation given to Jesus, but whatever that revelation is, it
Yeah.
was there and it was accessible to the Christians per 547 other part, which we'll get into. But my argument was, what was the Quran confirming in the possession of the Jews and Christians? And it says that they're supposed to uphold not only the Torah and Gospel, all the revelation given to them. So this is what I'm trying to get at. What is that revelation in Arabia? What did the Christians have?
So within the Christian canon, within the New Testament, there is content in there that is extant revelation from what Jesus taught, from what the prophets taught. That extant, how do I know what?
What is your criterion to determine that the statements in these books contain that revelation? Aren't you begging the question because you assume the Quran is revelation and it's the standard? This is true, this is not.
Okay, so the Islamic dilemma is called the Islamic dilemma because it is an internal critique brought by Christians against believing Muslims. The Islamic dilemma is not an academic argument. It is a polemical, religious, theological argument. Okay. So a theological argument is brought by Christians to a believing Muslim. I'm a believing Muslim.
To show what?
Sorry?
To show what? To show that the claim of Muhammad that God sent him is false, that he's not a true prophet.
Yeah, so the Islamic dilemma presumes that the interlocutor already has an established belief in the Quran, and they're trying to lead them from an established belief in the Quran as revelation to a non-belief in the Quran and a belief in Christianity. Sure. That's the dilemma. Okay. Right. So therefore, whoever is answering the dilemma, in this case, it's me. Tomorrow, you might talk to somebody else, but today it's me.
I like
so in answer, no, I enjoy talking to you too. So as a Muslim, I have at my disposal, right, all the internal resources of Islam to answer the dilemma. And to answer the dilemma, I don't have to go back and start from atheism. Of course, if you want me to do that, I can do that.
Yeah, I know how you're trying to answer, but I'm critiquing what you think is an internal method that consistently refutes the Islamic dilemma. So we keep repeating the same thing. No. So I want to try to advance the conversation. I'm aware that you think that within the Quran, you have the means by which refute the Islamic dilemma. And I'm showing you no, you're actually confirming the Islamic dilemma if you understand the point I'm making. And maybe it's my fault that I'm not as clear. So let me repeat what I'm saying here.
Sure. Yeah.
So you think the Quran is revelation, and therefore the Christians and Jews who believe that the God of Abraham sent these prophets, if they are consistent, they're going to have to believe that God sent Muhammad, and the most obvious thing to do is follow him. The Christians come back and say, well, hold on. Since you claim that the same God of Abraham sent you and that your message agrees with the prophets, well, here are the scriptures that we have in our possession from the prophets. We don't see you're consistent with them, and that's grounds to reject you as a false prophet. You're now coming back. I want you to hear yourself, and I know you are. You're now coming back and saying, well, see, internally, the Quran says the scriptures are not fully intact. So then you're using the Quran to show which parts are intact, and those parts that contradict the Quran are false, which then leads the Christian to say, exactly, that's what false prophets do. That's what Joseph Smith does. That's what everyone does. When the Bible exposes them as a fraud, see, your Bible's corrupt. Therefore, that's part of the dilemma. That's why we call Islamic dilemma.
No, so I think what's going on here is you're not actually.
Yeah, so Sam doesn't even understand what an internal critique is, let alone what the Islamic dilemma actually says. Right, so he's just shifting argument at this point. It's kind of similar to what Testify was saying and others as well. Like I believe another YouTuber named Capturing Christianity. It was very very bad argument, but it's a separate argument from what the Islamic dilemma is, right? That's not an internal critique. This is an internal critique, the Islamic dilemma, this whole argument. So yes, I'm just confused.
Employing the Islamic dilemma in its original way. So again, is the Islamic dilemma, is it an internal critique? Because that's what everybody says.
The Islamic dilemma, let me again, because you said I'm not blind consistently. Have you watched all my debates, read all my articles to know?
I've read a ton of your stuff. I've been binging your stuff for the last month. So, and Jay Dyer as well. So
now, let me explain to you the dilemma. The dilemma is this. If the Quran sets forth the argument that the scriptures of the Jews and Christians that they have is to be determinative for them to know whether the Quran confirms what is with them, because that's the argument. Let's bring up my screen.
Okay, that's not the argument.
Well, no, let me show you. No, remember, you did concede. There are various ways of interpreting these passages, so I'm not committed to your explanation. I'm
sure. Where does the Quran say? Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah.
The very passage you quoted, 242, you didn't quote 44. Let me go through this. And this is where you beg the question, saying, well, confirm doesn't mean everything, because here's 40 refuting it, which refuted actually nothing. It actually pushed the dilemma back further and caused more difficulties for your position, if I can articulate it. Here, let's go to 289. When there came to a book from God confirming what is with them, and they aforetime prayed for victory over the unbelievers, when there came to them that they recognize they disbelieve in it, and the curse of God is on the believers. So that's one. But here, the one you quoted, 242 on the screen, let's read it in context. Children of Israel, remember my blessing wherewith I blessed you, and fulfill my covenant, and I shall fulfill your covenant, and have awe of me. And believe in that I have sent down, confirming that which is with you. So here's the key. I'm sending this down that confirms what you have, so believe it. Now, it makes no sense to say, hey, believe what I sent down, confirming only a part what you have, because there are parts of it corrupt, because that would be grounds for the Jews to say, false prophet. And be not the first to disbelieve in it, and sell not my signs for a little price, and fear you me, and do not confound the truth of vanity, and do not conceal the truth wittingly. Well, you can't conceal something you don't have, Dr. Andani. And perform the prayer and pay the alms, and bow with those that bow.
Yeah, but and Danny's already made it clear that they have elements of truth with them. So obviously concealing what you have with you, that is the truth. Sam needs to show that it's absolutely everything, like everything that the Jews have is true, which obviously isn't the case. Yeah, I think that Sam, yeah, I think from what I remember, he just starts citing all of these verses. But at the end of the day, it's just going to be between, okay, Sam's interpretation against a Muslim interpretation. But the Muslim interpretation of what's being said will be backed up by hadiths and tafsir and so on and tradition. And anyways, it's an internal critique. So we have that at our disposal. We have the hadiths and tafsir literature. And we have the ability to assume the universality of the Quran. So yeah, there's no argument being made. It just shows that Sam has a possible interpretation that he's trying to posit against Khalil.
Will you bid others of piety and forget yourselves while you recite the book? Now, I don't know if you want to argue that in this context, the book refers to the heavenly one because it's saying it's reciting that book. So even if it's the heavenly one, they must have a replica of it on earth for them to recite it. Let me just give you one more, and then I want you to engage the argument. Now, since you quoted Sunni expositors, you quoted them. Here, I'm going to quote Qurtubi, whom you listed as one of those who thought that pretty much the New Testament is not the revelation of God. Okay, now, Tafsir al-Qurtubi, volume 1, pages 338, 339. That means the Jews and the book here is the Quran, while what is with them refers to the Torah and the Gospel. So now we're back to the point I'm trying to make. I can give you more. It says confirming what is with them. And here, a Sunni exegete who doesn't believe the Bible is uncorrupt admits what they had was the Torah and Gospel. And the argument is this revelation is true because it confirms what you have. So my question to you is, here, what would the Torah and the Gospel be in their possession? And then how can you tell me it's only confirming a part of it? Because that would be an argument against Muhammad. They'll say, oh, so you're saying our scriptures corrupt? All the more reason you're a false prophet.
Okay, so number one, this is an internal critique. So if it's an internal critique, I have to repeat myself because you're missing the logic of this. Yeah, so when you make an internal critique, you grant the belief system of the other side, and you try to start with their belief system and you try to lead them out of their belief system. Okay, that's an internal critique. And later today, if you want me to show you, I can show you 4 Christian dilemmas that are also internal critiques, just so you can see what this is.
That would be too bulky, right? So let's get into the subject.
No. I just as examples. So firstly, it's an internal critique. So okay, so second thing is these verses are not arguing. They're not saying the Quran is true because it confirms what is with you.
Yes, it is.
It's not. No, it's not an argument.
That's what it is.
It's not an argument.
Sorry, Dr. Andani, I'm not here to grant your reading. That's the argument.
Okay, so then I don't grant your reading, though.
Okay,
but I don't grant your reading. So then your dilemma doesn't work. If your dilemma relies on me granting every way you read the Quran, then your dilemma is just talking to yourself.
Okay, no. What it proves is the point we've been making. The Muslims cannot deal with their own scripture, so they have to argue the way that you're actually making my case. So I just want to make it clear how you're making my case. This is where you're up against the wall, because if you just read the text, someone comes to the text and not assume what you're assuming, just reading it, the argument is clear. You should believe this book because it confirms what is with you. But then the Jews are saying, no, it doesn't. It contradicts your false prophet. You see the dilemma, so you have to deny it, which you're actually making my case. This is your dilemma. You can't grant the plain reading because there's nothing in the context that says it only confirms a part of what they have. Can you show me that in the verse?
Okay, so 2 things. Number one, there's the word because is not there. It's not saying believe in, it doesn't say believe in the Quran because it confirms. The phrase confirming what is with you is describing, it's more like an adjective. It's just describing what the Quran does. It's not saying believe in X because it confirms what is with you.
What does it do with it? You're saying so believe in X.
Sam, let's let Khalil kind of finish this one here.
I'm sorry,
okay. The word liana because is not there. You can check the error.
I mean, the only instance where Sam could actually make this case is chapter 7, verse 157, where it says that the Prophet ﷺ is mentioned in the Torah and the Gospel. But in that case, obviously, that's part of what's with them. It's not everything. Not everywhere in the Torah and the Gospel does it mention the Prophet ﷺ. So even in that case, you would interpret it as exhaustive in terms of what they have in their hands. So that's the only case I can remember where the Quran actually does generally make an argument.
Arabic. It's not there. So this is not presented as an argument the way you're claiming. Now, I get you read it that way, okay, but I'm not obligated to.
I don't mean to. I just want to bring up my article. You keep swinging it down. Bring it up. It's okay. Okay. Sorry. I apologize. Continue. I don't mean to cut you off. My apologies.
Yeah.
I just want to bring it up.
It's okay. So I'm not obligated to read the verse that way, okay? Because actually what's going on here is the confirmation, and I've already talked about this, right? There are multiple reasons why it's not confirming everything. Because in Surah 2, right, there are beliefs that are with the Christians, such as the sonship of Jesus, which are denied. So what I think you're doing, and this is a broader point that applies to what you said at the beginning of this discussion. So you said that, all these examples where the Quran opposes a biblical teaching, you use that as a data point for premise 2. But that data is also relevant against premise 1, okay? Do you understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
Premise 1 is the Quran affirms the Bible or affirms the New Testament. That's premise 1. Premise 2 is the Quran opposes the teachings of the New Testament. But all the data that you furnish for premise 2 is a knockdown of premise 1.
Okay.
And the only way you could argue, the only way that you could sort of make an arbitrary split and refuse to apply the same data to premise 1 that you put into premise 2 is by just being arbitrary, by having an assumed conclusion.
Can I address your point? This is not like, not China, but we need to interact more than just, okay. Doctor, you want to have your cake and eat it too. I want people to go back into your presentation. You yourself admitted that there is a minority view. I don't know how you determine it's a minority view because it's a significant minority view, and I can list Bukhari and others, but I want people to go back because he wants his cake to eat it too. Did we not hear you?
Yeah, that's a lie, by the way. So even though this view has been attributed to Bukhari, may Allah be pleased with him, neither Bukhari or Razi, as he's going to say later, there's no good evidence to suggest they held to this view. And even in Razi's case, there's good evidence to suggest he didn't hold to this view at all. And there's actually a view that he has that contradicts fundamentally what Sam is trying to say. So I could show that later on when he does make that point specifically, inshallah.
You say that one plausible interpretation, which is not yours, is that yes, the Quran confirms the New Testament, and yet it doesn't teach divine sonship in the Trinity. So your point is moot because what the Quran would be attacking is the sonship attributed to Christ by Trinitarians. But you acknowledged that you can read the New Testament away as Unitarians do and deny the divine sonship of Christ in the Trinity. So that means even according to your argument, the Quran is not contradicting the contents of the New Testament. So why do you want your cake and eat it too?
So that's part of response number 3. My whole presentation was an elaboration of response number 1, and I said that. But if the thing is, Sam, you don't buy what.
Oh, Sam is so slow. Khalil is showing from one stance how it could be the case, and from another stance how it can be the case. And Sam's trying to make it as though he's molding it into one position where he's being inconsistent. Oh my god, I can't deal with, like, this guy's been doing apologetics for decades, and he can't track a basic debate or basic discourse. It's really embarrassing.
What I said, which is fine. Like, you have every right to be not convinced, and maybe the audience is not. That's okay. So if we end up, like I'm trying to show you, because remember, this is not an argument that Muslims invented to screw themselves over. This is an argument that you guys bring. So I'm saying, look, you bring the argument, and we Muslims have 3 walls of defense against this Islamic dilemma. And I'm defending on the front line on wall 1. And if you get past me, that's fine. Now you have to go deal with Ali Atai and Reza Shah Kazemi. That's wall 2. And then if you go through wall 2, you have to go to Sayyid Ahmed Khan with wall number 3. That's all I'm showing. And I'm holding up wall number 1. And I think I have the right to do that.
Okay, now let's come back. But so I'm going to get past your wall 1, but I'm just trying to show it does not logically follow. You're an academic and you're professional, and I respect your position. I'm not just saying to say, I mean that. So it does not follow just because chapter 2, 116 denies what you believe to be the sonship, that God has a son, that it's then denying the New Testament, even according to one of the positions that you articulate, which you don't accept. So granted, you don't accept that view, but it's still a view that nonetheless shows that the Quran can be denying the Trinity and still confirm the New Testament. So I'm going to ask you again, in light of these verses that speak of confirming what is with them, where do you get in these passages, not other passages that you assume, to 116, 117, I can give you chapter 9, verse 30. I know what the Quran says. You're assuming that because these statements say God has no son, and the Nasara, who say that Messiah is the son of Allah, Allah fight them, that means it's contradicting the New Testament. No, it would only mean it's contradicting their interpretation, which falls under one of the passages you cited, chapter 3, verse 78. They twisted with their tongues, but it doesn't mean that the Quran is attacking the text. So I'm trying to have you prove to me from these verses that it's saying the text is corrupt. You haven't done that, Dr. Andani, so I'm waiting for the evidence. Give it to me.
So again, Sam, you assume that the Quran confirms the New Testament. You assume it, and then you want evidence that it doesn't confirm it. But you have to first show me, where does the Quran say this 27-book New Testament is revealed by God? Where does it say that?
That way. It says,
where does it say that?
I'm going to answer you, Dr. Sir, I promise you I'm going to answer you.
Yeah, so where?
Okay. When it says confirming what was with them, and in 566-68, it says that the Jews and Christians are to hold the Torah and the gospel and all the revelation sent down to them. I'm going to ask you again, historically, what is that revelation given to them? See, I'm asking you, you're not answering. So I'm going to ask you again. It's not just Torah and gospel. You focus on the gospel. it goes beyond the gospel. It talks about what is with them, and they didn't just have the gospel. Even if you want to put in the apocryphal gospels, that's your dilemma. That means the Quran is confirming those apocryphal gospels, and therefore the canon of the Christians is bigger, not smaller. But specifically in 566, let me show it to you. 566, 68, and I can bring in the study Quran, which is also modern Quran. I'm just telling you, it's not my view. So people think it's no. You even admitted it in your opening. I want Christians to go back, clip this. He admitted, yes, there have been Muslims in the past, and there are also present Muslims who agree with my view. The Quran does not teach that the Old and New Testaments are corrupt, but they are the scriptures entrusted to the Jews and Christians. Now, Dr. Andani, even though you threw these two under the bus, I'll ignore them. I'll just go with what it says. I won't read Torah, Old Testament. I'll just read it as Torah and
I mean, it doesn't say Old Testament. You're using these amateur translations.
No, it's
it
not
says Torah. It says Torah and Injil. I don't know why you use.
I'm going to challenge you, Dr. Andani. Show me where the Torah in your Quran is something that is defined as given to only one prophet. Where does it say that?
Well, in Surah 6, you have to realize that in the Meccan period, Torah and Gospel are not used. Only Kitab and Hikmah are used. So in Surah 6, it describes the Kitab given to Moses. I'll get there.
Please get there.
Yeah, so Surah 6 describes, the word Torah is not in the Meccan part of the Quran. We have to keep that in mind. Torah and Injil only are used in the Medinan part of the Quran. So in the Meccan part of the Quran uses this generic term Kitab. So it talks about the Kitab given to Moses, in which is guidance and light. Later on, a decade later, in Surah 5, it talks about the Torah, in which is guidance and light given to the children of Israel. So the description of the Kitab Musa and the Torah are basically the same, and their functions are the same. And if you don't believe me, go read the Harvard PhD dissertation.
You have authority not to the internal Quran.
Excuse me, can I finish?
Because I'm trying to address that. You didn't answer my point.
Well,
Yeah, so Torah can be used in two senses. I mentioned this in my debate as well with Chris. So it's either the revelation given to Moses, peace be upon him, or it's referred to generally as all Jewish teachings that they have with them.
I'm literally answering your point.
Yeah, let's let Khalil finish.
No, I know you said interaction. Okay. What do you want me to do? Go ahead.
No, I'm very happy to interact with you, but and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but I've been trying to remain silent while you complete your thoughts, and I'm just trying to do the same thing.
Can I just address that though? The point is,
I don't think Khalil finishes his
I'm not addressing his argument. I'm saying what he just said here. The only reason why I'm cutting you off is not because I want to cut you off. It's because I don't want you to just bring in other points. And when you bring a point, I want to address it immediately, lest it becomes lost. That's the only reason why I'm doing it. But finish your point, because I just want to repeat what you said.
Since you asked me, how do you know the Torah is the Kitab of Moses? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay. So if you track the Kitab Musa, if you track that throughout the Quran, everything it says about the Kitab of Musa, everything it does, okay? And then and the description, then if you track the word Torah and you track the Torah's description and its function, you're going to find that they're about the same thing. And if you don't believe me, because this is just a stream and I can't demonstrate it, go read the PhD dissertation of Professor Mohsen Goodarzi. He's a Harvard professor of Quranic studies. His entire PhD dissertation is on this very topic, that the Kitab of Musa is the Torah.
Okay. Now, can I address you? Yeah. Can I address your point?
Sure.
Okay. I'll do you one better. I'll give you the Salaf, because again, remember, you went to a PhD, a modern academic. I'm going to go to pre-modern Islamic exegesis. I'm going to quote the Sunni position, where you're going to have Ibn Kathir admitting that the Salaf use the word Torah for all the scriptures of the people of the book. So you can appeal to modern scholar. I'm going to appeal to Muslim expositors, pre-modern scholarship. Let me get the article. So let me now address your point as I bring you up this article. I just got to put in the right words. First of all, I want everyone to see what you did. You went to chapter 6. You went to chapter 6 where it says a book is given to Moses. Folks, I want you to notice, it never said that book is the Torah. Then he made the logical leap in assuming, since that book has guidance and light, and the Torah has guidance and light, it must be the same book because it's given to the children of Israel. But then the gospel is also guidance and light. Does that mean the gospel is identical to the Torah? Even in your position, it's not identical. But more importantly, the Salaf say the Torah means more than the books of Moses. Here it is. Ibn Kathir on 757. Please don't throw Ibn Kathir under the bus, because you referenced him as one of your points that agrees with you. New Testament is not revelation. Here it says, it was common in the speech of our Salaf that they describe the books of the people of the two scriptures as a Torah, as some hadiths concur. So you haven't proven your case. So I'm going to come back to...
sorry, Sam, I'm having trouble understanding the relevance of your point. So firstly, so what does the meaning of the Torah have to do with the present discussion? Number one. Number two, Sam, why are you appealing to a scholar, Ibn Kathir, when the same Ibn Kathir holds my position that the Bible is not preserved? Why are you making an appeal?
Wonderful, because since you appeal to Ibn Kathir, holds your position, your same authority now refutes the other part of your argument. That's why I'm appealing to it. But first of all,
the other part of my argument, because I haven't talked about the Torah in my argument. My argument is about the Gospels and the New Testament. So if you accept Ibn Kathir, if you accept Ibn Kathir, then I don't know why we're here, because Ibn Kathir holds my position. He holds number 1. And Qurtubi, by the way, holds position number 1. He doesn't hold position number 2.
You want me to address? You want to talk over me? Because now you're cutting me off.
Yeah, let's let Sam come in here.
I know Danny's getting heated, but it's okay. We're professionals.
He's not getting heated. He's over there smiling, chilling, having a good time. Everyone's having a good time.
Okay, let me repeat.
I'm having fun, so please go ahead. I'm enjoying it.
I love you. You're a professional, man, and I'm honored to share the platform. I mean it, because I'm just an internet apologist. So for you to share this platform when you actually rub shoulders with academics, that's actually, I consider it an honor. So God bless you. But coming back to the issue, if you remember why I said it, because in your slide you mentioned Ibn Kathir, you mentioned Qurtubi. So since you appeal to them holding your position, I'm using now the very sources that you appeal to show they agree with you, to show now they disagree with you, that the Torah is limited to the books of Moses. Now, coming back to the first question, why did I mention it? Because you threw Muhammad Ahmed Samir under the bus saying, Torah doesn't mean the Old Testament. Yes, it does, according to Ibn Kathir. They're right, you're wrong. Here, let me read what he says. So you threw these people on the bus, ad hominem them, because they're not academics. Well, I'm not an academic, so why are you sharing the platform with me? Well, now let's come back to this. It was common in the speech of our Salaf that they described the books of the people of the two scriptures, Torah. That means Muhammad Ahmed Samira are being more faithful to the historical context of what these terms mean and to Islamic tradition. But that's neither here nor there. We actually forgot the original point. What was the original point? Do you remember what the original point was? When you said, nowhere does the Quran confirm the 27 books in the Testament. And I said, au contraire. Because let's go back to the point, which was the initial point. That's why I stopped you. It's not because I'm trying to cut you off. When you keep going on and bringing other issues, I got to keep up. Here, one more time. 566. Now I'm going to ask you the question. We're going to go with your preferred translation, Torah and Gospel. Have they followed the Torah and the Gospel? And what was revealed to them? It's not just Torah and Gospel. It says what was revealed to them from their Lord. And then again, it says, tell the people, look, you have nothing unless you follow the Torah and the Gospel, and that God is revealed to you. So I'm going to ask the question, which I didn't get an answer to, at least maybe not to my satisfaction. Since the Quran doesn't just say the Torah and the Gospel, it says Torah and Gospel, whatever was revealed to you, can you now tell us historically, what else did the Jews and Christians have that they believed was revelation to them that the Quran tells them to uphold?
Okay. But firstly, the opinion of the Salaf does not entail that that's what the Quran means by the word. You know, and we recognize this in modern academia, that the Quranic exegesis of the Salaf or whoever it is, there's a big gap between that and what the Quran actually means. Now, the reason why I put tafsir scholars on my slides is not because I appeal to them, but you appeal to them. You cite tafsir all over your articles. You throw tafsir at various people. So in anticipation that you would do that, that's the only reason I have tafsir.
When you had a presentation with Paul Williams, that's the reason why you cited them? Because in your presentation with Paul Williams, which I watched this week, reference, you said to him, pre-modern exegesis of the Quran, you mentioned, right? So were you mentioning the tafsir because of me? You had me in mind in your presentation, Paul?
No, okay, so the presentation on Paul's channel is an academic presentation. So I made 2 claims. I said, from the academic critical perspective, this is the view of the Quran, which is the view that I put forth. Then what we do is, as an academic activity, you track how was the same issue understood by post-Quranic scholars. So as a good scholar, I showed a Mu'tazili view of Jahiz, I showed a Sunni view of Ibn Taymiyyah, and I showed an Ismaili view of Qadi Nu'man, right? And that's called reception history. I was not telling Paul, you know what, Paul, because Qadi Nu'man says this, you should believe me. I never made an appeal to tafsir. But what I know is that when you argue theologically, and that's what you do, and I don't mean that as an insult by any means, because I have a lot of respect for theology, and I also do theology in some of my published work. So when you argue theologically with other Muslims, you appeal to tafsir. But I find we're quite selective. So when Ibn Kathir says something that's making a mini point that you like, you'll quote Ibn Kathir. But then when Ibn Kathir says, for example, his commentary, Surah 12, verse 111, where he says the Quran only...
Yeah, so Khalil cooked him here, because what this is showing is that, well, Sam's trying to show that because Ibn Kathir says X, therefore Y is entailed, or it implies Y. But the thing that he's trying to show that it entails, Ibn Kathir doesn't even hold to that view. Because Ibn Kathir believes in X, he doesn't then believe in Y. So, yeah, this is like really weird, selective, just, I don't know, I guess cognitive dissonance on Sam's part.
Confirms parts of the scriptures of the people of the book that are true, and it doesn't confirm parts that are false. That's my view. You say no, that's inadmissible. So
can I address that before we go to other points, because you brought up a lot more points.
Yeah. So how do you see consistency in your approach of citing, like sometimes like Ibn Jurayj, his opinion on Muhayman, you throw that out, but then you'll find him quoted on another one of your articles about something else, and you'll approve that.
Very easy. Very easy. I mean, you studied, you know this. When Ibn Kathir says something that's not in the Quran, and he reads into the Quran like you do, that's when I question the validity of his exegesis. Because even chapter 12, verse 111, what you appeal to, I will challenge you to show me in chapter 10. In fact, if Cameron can bring up my article again, I don't know where this guy disappears to. Cameron, we need the article, brother. Stuck for a lot.
I don't disappear anywhere. I'm right here.
Okay. So now here's my criterion right here. I'm going to show you. 1 second. Let me get it for you. Let me get it here. The reason why I reject Ibn Kathir, because even Ibn Kathir will acknowledge that there are others besides him, like Bukhari, that doesn't accept his position, and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, who is another disciple of Ibn Taymiyyah, which you also referenced at the very last point with Paul Williamson. I have Ibn Taymiyyah, but even Ibn Kathir doesn't have the unanimity of even his contemporaries agreeing with him. And more importantly, chapter 12, verse 111, the context doesn't say only a part of it. Let me just bring it up. Sorry, I just got to bring it up.
No, but Ibn Kathir says it's only a part of it confirmed.
That's
his
point.
opinion.
The verse
Yeah.
itself doesn't say it. So when Ibn Kathir clearly is reading his bias into the verses like you have been doing, and the verse doesn't say it only confirms a part of it, but it confirms what is there, then when Ibn Kathir says, well, we got a problem here, folks. And what's the problem? Let me just get the verse so people see what we're talking about. I got too many articles on this, and I can't track the
But
mind.
Tim, you do realize that I gave you a very good reason to conclude the Quran is only confirming a part of what is with them. So if I write an essay, and at one part of my essay I say I agree with the views of Cameron Bertuzzi on whatever, and then in the same essay I pick out a particular opinion of Cameron Bertuzzi and I say this I believe is wrong. You would just read the first part of what I said, but you would ignore what I say on page 5, or you would accuse me of logically contradicting myself. I think the most charitable reading, based on the basic principle of charity, if I say I agree with Cameron on page 1, and then on page 5, I pick out one belief of Cameron, oh, he's a Catholic, and I think that's wrong, nobody would say I contradicted myself. People would say that you agreed with everything that Cameron says, except this particular belief that I called out as being false. The Quran does exactly the same thing. So that's just called a charitable reading. You call it a bias, but I don't think it's a bias to read any text charitably. If I pulled out John 17:3, and said the Father, according to Jesus, is the only true God, the first thing you would tell me is, well, you need to read everything else that's said in John 17 before you use that against me. I don't see how what I'm doing here is any different.
All right. Well,
Yeah, exactly. That's the main point, and this is what I pressed against Chris during my debate with Chris. Maybe inshallah we can pull this up real quick where I make this point, and the point is just about being consistent and not holding to double standards when you're reading scripture, right? Especially considering this is an internal critique as well. Like, there needs to be a level of charitability when reading the other person's text. And inshallah, I can play this where I show the example from Matthew 23, where Jesus is apparently confirming what the Pharisees were teaching, and yet Jesus doesn't agree with certain teachings that the Pharisees were teaching. Obviously, we wouldn't say that Jesus is then contradicting himself, right? We're going to take a charitable view and say, okay, well, Jesus may have a general affirmation view on what the Pharisees teach, but on certain parts they would have corrupted teachings, right? Obviously, their interpretation of the text of the Torah would be different to Jesus at times, as well as just certain oral practices like washing your hands before eating and so on as an obligation. I could, yeah, Dean, but you're not charitable in John 17:3. What? But I'm the most charitable person with the Bible. I don't think you find many other people in terms of the Muslim side where they're charitable with the Bible here. I don't say John 17:3. I don't say John is contradicting himself in John 17:3, by the way. I believe that John takes the Father to be the only true God, and Jesus is not the only true God, but Jesus is a lesser divinity. So when John says that Jesus is God and the Father is God, well, it's just in different senses. That's why there's a reconciliation here. So I don't do an uncharitable reading of John 17:3. If I did have an uncharitable reading, I would read into the text a certain theology where both of them are titled the true God and say that John's contradicting himself, which is just like imposing a later developed doctrine onto John's mouth. That's being completely uncharitable. So I'm just going to play this quickly for anyone that has missed it, where I do make this point. All of the Bible at its time? Well, the answer is no. The burden of proof is on Chris to show an absolute confirmation with no exceptions at all to this rule. And inshallah, today I'm going to be going through and destroying that claim of absolute confirmation. So this is my position. The Quran generally affirms the truths contained with the scriptures at its time. It's going to be a general affirmation of these categories I've just listed. And the general affirmation will be restricted to whatever is confirmed by the Quran and Sunnah. Anything contradicting it, we are to discard, and anything in between, we are to remain agnostic. We are neither to affirm or deny. Here's an example from Matthew 23, right? You have Jesus commanding the Pharisees. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, right? But the Pharisees, they taught the oral law.
Right? So if this is not just a general command, this is an absolute command, and we go like with sort of uncharitable reading of texts, this is going to be a contradiction, because we see times where Jesus, peace be upon him, in the Gospels, he actually condemns the Pharisees for certain oral practices, right? So he doesn't believe in everything that they teach. The Pharisees also teach that Jesus, peace be upon him, isn't the Messiah. Is he saying to take those teachings from the Pharisees? Is he saying for for his disciples and for his followers to go ahead and believe absolutely everything? Of course not. As I just made mention, this is a restricted obedience. This isn't absolute. So let's be consistent now and be charitable, just as I'm being charitable with the text here. Be charitable with the Quran when it makes general stipulations and general commands. Did Jesus believe in all of the oral law that the Pharisees were teaching?
I'm going to say no.
Do you believe in Matthew 23, Jesus is commanding the disciples to obey absolutely everything that the Pharisees teach?
Is it absolutely everything?
Yep. I'm asking. Okay, he's not. Right. So you believe this is a general statement where Jesus is saying to obey the Pharisees, where there's exceptions and it's not an absolute thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you have that level of charitability when you read the Quran?
The Quran contradicts the Torah and the Injil. There's a claim that actually.
Yeah, I don't know how Chris didn't see that inconsistency there. But yeah, that's the main point, right? The main point is don't have double standards. When we read the Gospel of Matthew, we don't say that Jesus or the author is contradicting himself, when other times in Matthew, Jesus contradicts what the Pharisees teach. Obviously, even in this quote itself, in Matthew 23, Jesus says, obey everything that they teach. He actually qualifies it by saying everything. And yet you want us to be charitable with that, but you're not being charitable with the Quran. It's just complete hypocrisy and double standards. Yeah, it's not about copying what they do. It's about doing what they teach. No one's making the claim about mimicking their actions. It's about implementing what they say or what they teach. And part of what they say and what they teach is the oral law, as well as wrong interpretations of the Torah, obviously.
Now you understand why I stopped you at key moments, because it was like, fine, I don't mind. But let me go back to your example. Did you hear how you began your example? I've been paying attention. You said, if I said on page 1, I agree with Cameron Bertuzzi on one particular point. I'm just saying what you said. You qualified it. So if you qualified your agreement with what Cameron Bertuzzi wrote, saying, here I agree with Cameron Bertuzzi on this, then I know that you have an agreement in this area, not all areas. But this is where you're begging the question. None of the verses that I've cited make the qualification you do. You make that qualification.
No, the surah does. The surah.
Let's let Sam finish his
Surah
thought.
2, Surah 2, Surah 4. Both surahs say confirming what is with them.
I'll get to 4. I promise you, every verse you have.
Again, both of them say confirming what is with them, and in both surahs, the sonship of Jesus is denied. Now, if you think the New Testament teaches the sonship of Jesus, if that's what it means, then the Quran is denying that. It's pretty simple.
Can I address you without you cut me, because you accused me of cutting
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, let's go to 12:111, the very passage you cited. Let me enlarge it. Because you said to me, and I'm going to quote Ibn Kathir. We're not off of Ibn Kathir yet. I'm going to now use Ibn Kathir to prove my point. So we're not done with Ibn Kathir, and I'm going to get to your assertion of sonship, because even then, we'll get there. Here. However you want, and by the way, I don't know why you made a big deal about between his hands. No one takes that literally. It's an idiomatic phrase. And by the way, it's not just Muhammad Samira, it's Muhammad Assad. Go read his commentary, his explanation.
I did.
Okay.
I did, but he doesn't interpret it your way. That's a bit deceptive.
So, Cameron, how come you don't tell him he's got me off? When I'm trying to
I did tell him.
I apologize. I thought I would be.
I did tell him. Yeah.
111. Okay.
If it happens again, Khalil, I'm gonna have to mute you. How about that?
All right, then you're gonna have to get him out of here. Okay, I'm 12.
Get out of here.
And now, remember, folks, what he said, that I reject Ibn Kathir's exposition of this passage. Now you're gonna see why. In their narration, information had been example warning to those of the pure mind's hearts. It was information, speech to be fabricated, but confirmation, forget about between the sense. We're gonna forget about that. What was before it? Now, can anyone tell me where this passage says confirming only a part of it, like he and Ibn Kathir stated? Let me read it again. And confirmation, what was before it? No qualification. No, only a part of it. No, only some of it, most of it. That's what you have to do, and Ibn Kathir does, because you're stuck. Because if you take what it says and you agree with what it says, that means it's over for Muhammad's prophethood. Because the Bible that he supposedly confirms shows he's a false prophet. Now, before you come in with your response, now here again, I'm not alone. I'm going to show you what Ibn Kathir, and he's not the only one, by the way. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah cites al-Bukhari, as does Martin Wintingham, as their Muslim views of the Bible, the first 4 centuries, recommended by someone you like, Shabir Ali. That's how I found out about the book. So I want to see Ibn Kathir, who says only a part of it, with al-Bukhari, who disagrees with him. Here it is, al-Bukhari and corruption. This is his note on this section of Kitab al-Tawheed. By the mount and inscribed book, Qatada said that mastur means written. Yastura means they inscribe. And Kitab is the whole of the Quran and source. He said, Matal Fizu, excuse my bad Arabic pronunciation. He does not say anything but what is written against him. Ibn Abbas said, both good and evil are recorded. You harafunna, which is the word where we get tahrif, means they remove. No one removes the works, it's a typo from Aisha Bewley. So it's the words of one of the books of Almighty Allah, but they twist them, interpreting them improperly. So now let's see what Ibn Kathir says about this and what others say, modern and ancient scholars. Let's see. Martin Wintingham, what does he say right here? Just the tradition literature contains few references to textual corruption of the Bible. It likewise provides few references to issue of corrupt biblical interpretation. Al-Bukhari adds a note between hadiths in the section of his hadith collection entitled The Book of Divine Unity. Here he quotes Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas, Muhammad's cousin, one of the companions, is commenting on the term "yu harifunna," referring to Quran 446, the passage you just mentioned, which we're going to get to. Because in that context, it actually proves logos Christology, contrary to your assertion that the Quran denies Jesus is a creative word, and you said we can bring that up, which uses this term. Ibn Abbas is reported as explaining "yu harifunna" by saying, but no one removes an utterance from one of the books of God, but they altered it, they interpret it according to the wrong interpretation. Now this puts those who follow Bukhari in a dilemma, because elsewhere there's a statement attributed to Ibn Abbas that seems to suggest that he thought the Bible's corrupt. So he addresses it. This concerns Quran 446, which specifically uses some, by the way, I have the book right here, so people don't think I'm making it up. Here's the book right here. So I'm quoting accurately, so people don't then, I know you know he's an academic. So we know that you know that. He's in the field. All right, so now let's continue. This concerns Quran 446, which specifically accuses some Jews of taking words out of their context. The statement appears to conflict with Ibn Abbas's other statement, and that he quoted above, and involving Quran 279, which states that at least some Jews corrupted the text. Notice, some Jews, even if we grant that interpretation, not all Jews, and it doesn't indict Christians. The two statements could be reconciled if the accusation related to Quran 279 was regarded as only describing a specific group of Jews rather than as a general statement. I'll skip the fact that he brings in Al-Darimi as saying the corruption is interpretation, because I want to go to Ibn Kathir. Watch Ibn Kathir. Okay, and Al-Jawziyah quotes Bukhari too, by the way, but I want to go to Ibn Kathir. Here's Ibn Kathir, who in that same passage says, well, it can't mean the Torah and the Gospel they have today, because all the Arabic versions shows corruption. Again, begging the question. But here's Ibn Kathir, his exposition on chapter 3, verse 78, which you can read online. He quotes Bukhari. All right, here we go. On the other side, that's Al-Jawziyah, sorry, Mujahid, Al-Shabbi, Al-Hassan, Qatada, and Rabbi bin Anas said that, who distort the book with their tongues, means they alter Allah's words. Al-Bukhari reported that Ibn Abbas said that the ayah means they alter and add, although none among Allah's creations can remove the words of Allah from his books. They alter and distort their apparent meanings. So here you have Ibn Kathir saying, Bukhari cites Ibn Abbas to show the books have not been corrupted, they've been misinterpreted. And Al-Jawziyah quotes him too. But I'm going to avoid that because Ibn Kathir doesn't accept this, like you don't. But I'm not obligated to accept Ibn Kathir's rejection because this statement is actually confirmed by the Quran. Your position is reading into the Quran. So that's
let's get Andani back in here.
So firstly,
Andani, we'll let you go for a while because that was a long one.
Yeah. So I'm a little puzzled on what the point is. What point are you trying to make by bringing up Bukhari? Are you just simply trying to say that look, the Muslim belief that the texts of the revelation have been corrupted is not universal, it's not unanimous? I already conceded that at the beginning.
No, that's not my point. I mean, repeat it. I don't want to catch up, but
I think you've gone long enough. But okay. So you're saying that you disagree with Ibn Kathir. You disagree with Ibn Kathir because another scholar before Ibn Kathir, Bukhari, takes a view different from Ibn Kathir. I mean, that's not news to anybody, right? We know that some member of Ahl Hadith did not believe in the corruption of the text. But if you scroll up a little bit, Ibn Kathir also gave the opinion of Qatada and others who are also Salaf who do believe that the words of God were altered, right? So basically in the early period, and I've said this in my slides, in early Islam, in the first 3 centuries, both views coexist. And the view that the actual words of revelation have been corrupted, that view is as early as the 8th century, if not in the Quran itself. And again, I will remind you that according to Walid Saleh, the academic consensus, and consensus here means the majority, not unanimity, the academic consensus of critical scholars on the Quran is that the Quran does assert the textual corruption of prior revelations. And I said a Muslim who accepts that view is on very firm ground. So there's nothing that obligates a Muslim to follow Bukhari's opinion over Ibn Kathir's, over Qatada.
Also, I want to just clarify one point as well. I don't think there's good evidence to say that Bukhari even held to this view to begin with. And I'll be giving evidence for this as well. I'm also going to give evidence on why I believe that Al-Razi doesn't hold to this view either, even though Sam will later mention his name as well as being one of those who held to this view that the Torah was completely preserved. So I have these tweets on my Twitter account. I tweeted this a couple months back, actually, but I reposted them recently. So Sam made the claim here. I posted the clip. And he makes the claim that prominent Sunni scholars back then held to this view of the Torah being absolutely preserved. And he's trying to make a case now that, okay, there was proper ikhtilaf amongst the Salaf on this point. But I'm not going to grant him that Al-Razi or Bukhari believe this. He needs to actually show good evidence for this. Quoting Ibn al-Qayyim, may Allah be pleased with him, 500 years later, attributing the view onto Bukhari and Razi isn't good enough evidence. Give me a quote from Razi. Give me a quote from Bukhari. Giving me someone 500 years later who's giving his opinion on what they believed isn't sufficient for me. It's not compelling, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, before we delve into the evidence, I also want to mention that we can easily use this against them. Just because someone or a group of people, of scholars, held to a certain view doesn't mean that the view now has some sort of backing. Well, Eusebius, the father of church history that they have, was an outright Arian, right? And he's someone massive they rely on for history, as well as we can make cases for other people as well that they held to heretical beliefs. There's groups of them that held to these heretical beliefs, even though they use these same people for particular sources, right? That's something inconsistent, and it's not to say anything about whether their reading is more apparent or that their interpretations are more compelling now. That doesn't follow, right? Anyways, we can talk about now the evidence on what I was saying. So firstly, it's very clear from Razi's works itself that he believes the original Torah was distorted in Babylon itself. And I give the reference here from his book. And the quote that they like to get from Razi in terms of his tafsir, I forget on which verse, but Razi pretty much says that it's impossible for the Jews at the time of the Prophet ﷺ to distort the Torah because it's reached a level of mass transmission. That's not to say about whether the Torah has been preserved in the past or not. And he makes it clear that it was not preserved in the past because of the fact that in Babylon it was altered, and this was at a time where mass transmission wasn't something that was possible. So he says, and this is the translation of his Arabic, the original Torah was altered in Babylon in this way and was established after Babylon in its current form. It spread among the people, cuts out there, but therefore it was difficult for the Jews to distort it verbally. They resorted to a strange type of distortion, which is distorting the words from their places with false interpretations. So it reached a point where even the distorted Torah that they had in their hands, they couldn't distort it further in terms of the text. So instead, they resorted to false interpretations and misplacing of words. So it's clear Al-Razi, this view is a misattribution. Now that we've established clearly that Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah misattributes this view to Al-Razi, it's not unfeasible to say that possibly he also misattributed the view onto Bukhari as well. So let's get into that now. So yeah, unlike with Al-Razi, we have to delve a bit deeper into the evidences to defend Bukhari from this false attribution. But firstly, we must understand that Ibn al-Qayyim comes 500 years later, only uses one hadith that is ambiguous to attribute this position to Bukhari. So not only Ibn al-Qayyim came 500 years later, but he's using a hadith that Bukhari had that is ambiguous in nature as well. And we're going to get into why it's so ambiguous in a moment. So this is the reference from Ibn al-Qayyim. I give the reference. He says this is the opinion of Bukhari. He said in his Sahih, they alter meaning, they change in interpretation, and no one can change the actual wording of a book of God Almighty, but they interpret it differently from its correct meaning. And anyways, this statement from Bukhari, as I'll mention as well, Ibn al-Qayyim misattributes it to Bukhari. It's actually meant to be attributed to Ibn Abbas, and we'll get to that in just a second. This is the quote from Bukhari Sahih. And the reason as to why Ibn Qayyim is wrong here is that this statement is a continuation from Ibn Abbas and not Bukhari himself speaking. Ibn Abbas is speaking throughout all of this yellow highlighted speech, and one can interpret this section, they alter to the wording. Someone can interpret this as Bukhari speaking or Ibn Abbas, but I'm more inclined to say that this is Ibn Abbas speaking. That just makes more sense in the context of he's speaking all across this this hadith. So it makes most sense that it's Ibn Abbas speaking. And even Ibn Kathir quotes this as Ibn Abbas speaking, not Bukhari. And Ibn Hajar also makes mention that this isn't Bukhari speaking, this is Ibn Abbas speaking. And he says that it's mu'allaq anyways, but we'll get into that. So the reason why we have credence to take the view that this is an attribution to Ibn Abbas is that prominent tafsirs like Ibn Kathir, when quoting the statement from Bukhari Sahih, he attributes it to Ibn Abbas, and this is in Tafsir Ibn Kathir, Quran chapter 3, verse 78. Al-Bukhari reports that Ibn Abbas said, and then he goes on to say what is attributed to Bukhari. And as a side note as well, this is mu'allaq, as I said, it's disconnected to Ibn Abbas. So it's not even a view you can attribute to Ibn Abbas himself. The statement isn't authentic to either him or Bukhari. So yeah, again, like that's an issue. But obviously, what you can also extract from this is that Ibn Hajar says that this is Ibn Abbas's words, not Bukhari's. Okay. But let's grant the authenticity for the sake of the argument. Let's grant that it is authentic to Ibn Abbas, and let's work with that. So the chapter heading tells us how Bukhari would have possibly understood what he's mentioning here in the context. And he says, or he puts it under the chapter heading about the Lawh al-Mahfuz, so the preserved tablet, right? So that's the chapter heading, and this gives us more context on what's being said. And I grant, like, not everything, as I say here, not everything in this text is talking about the preserved tablet, but at the very least, it gives us some precedence than say the preserved tablet is being spoken of here. It's not necessarily, it means that all the text is speaking of it, but it at least frees it from being completely ad hoc in terms of the sort of interpretation we're trying to go for. So, yeah, then I also give an argument here about Ibn Abbas saying that the meaning of them distorting is that they remove. And then Ibn Abbas goes on to say, and no one can remove a word from the books of Allah. So it could be that he's talking about here that they remove from the books in this life, but no one can remove from the books of Allah in the heavens, which is the preserved tablet. So remember this statement that he said, no one can remove a word from the books of Allah. We have a Tabari using the same sort of language, talking about the preserved tablet as well. So we have here in his tafsir of Quran chapter 6, verse 115, there is no changer of his words, meaning there is no one who can alter what he has informed in his books about what will occur at its appointed time and moment. As Allah has one who can alter what he has informed about as an event that will happen, thereby nullifying its occurrence as he, the glorified, has informed. This is because the fabricators cannot add to or subtract from the books of Allah, exactly how Ibn Abbas spoke previously about the preserved tablet. And then another justification is that Ibn Kathir cites a similar quote, which sounds even more like talking about the preservation of the Torah and Injil, from Wahab bin Munabbih, who's, I believe he's a tabi'i. So Ibn Kathir quotes Wahab bin Munabbih. This is the Arabic, but let's read the English. Wahab bin Munabbih says, the Torah and the Injil remain as Allah revealed them, and no letter in them was removed. However, the people misguide others by addition and false interpretation, relying on books that they wrote themselves. As for Allah's books, they are still preserved and cannot be changed. So Ibn Kathir gives us an interpretation here. If Wahab meant the books that are currently in the hands of the people of the book, then we should state that there is no doubt that they are altered, distorted, added to, and deleted from them. Then what's relevant after is that Ibn Kathir believes that there's a level of ambiguity here, so there's a level of unclearness here, to the point where you can interpret Wahab's statement as possibly meaning the books of Allah that he has with him, with the preserved tablet. Then he says, then indeed, if he did mean this, these books are preserved and were never changed. Okay? So this gives precedence to what we were saying before. Bukhari's statement, or what he recorded from Ibn Abbas, is less clear about being the books of this life. Wahab seems to be more clear on that point. And yet Ibn Kathir still says there's a possibility to interpret him otherwise. Okay. I mean, if you want to look at the rest as well, I don't want to make this too long. You guys can check my tweet, inshallah. But the simple point is that there's not good enough evidence to attribute this view to both Bukhari and Al-Razi. especially Al-Razi, there's clear indications that contradict what is being said of him. And in Bukhari's case, there's no clear indication at all that he believed the Torah was preserved entirely.
Over over Al-Jahiz, right? Over Qadi Abdul Jabbar, over Qurtubi. Qurtubi does actually say that what the Gospels that the Christian have is not the Injil that was revealed to Jesus. Like, the thing about tafsir, Sam, is tafsir is not. Well, I don't know. Are you still here now?
I think he had to plug in his laptop, maybe.
The thing about tafsir is not a prescriptive discourse. It's an exploratory discourse. And what I mean by that is there are certain discourses in Islam where you have to follow a school of thought and you have to follow the views of those scholars. An example is Aqidah, creed, which you're quite familiar with, right? So if somebody says they're a Salafi or they're a Hanbali, they have to subscribe to an actual Hanbali creed, which is a set of theological opinions. Same for Asharis, same for Maturidis. Tafsir doesn't work like that. Tafsir is very much a buffet of opinions, and that's why one mufassir like Tabari or whoever it is, Ibn Kathir is a great example. Ibn Kathir will report a wide range of opinions on a verse, many of which he doesn't personally hold to, and then he'll just settle on his conclusion. So what I'm wondering is, in this discussion between us, right, on the Islamic dilemma, if you're presenting that dilemma to a Muslim, and the Muslim has to go interpret the Quran, right, to address the dilemma, let's say the way I'm doing it, there are ample resources within the tafsir tradition for a Muslim to go to. Ryan Schaffner's thesis gives like several examples of early Muslim scholars going back to the 8th century who believed that the revelatory texts are corrupted. So any Muslim can just point to that. For me personally, it's much easier. I'm not Sunni, so I'm not even if Sunnis were beholden to all the tafsir opinion, which they're not, but even if Sunnis were, I certainly am not beholden. And as a theologically believing Ismaili, I would simply go to my imams and my guys, and they're quite clear that the Bible that you guys have today is not the original revelation. But I don't really see the point in, like, you can appeal to Bukhari. And the other thing about your appeal, I could still disagree that that's what Bukhari meant, because, and again, nothing much rides on this, but the section of Bukhari that you quoted, where he quotes the opinion of Ibn Abbas, which says nobody can alter the words from God's kitab, that whole discussion is in the context of the guarded tablet. And the guarded tablet is a pre-existent heavenly book that contains a transcript of all the Kitab Allah. And at that level of the guarded tablet, nobody can change anything, right? And that's how many have interpreted Ibn Abbas's comments, because he puts Ibn Abbas's comment, no one can alter the books of God, in the section on the guarded tablet. So that's another way you can still read Bukhari and reach the same conclusion as Ibn Kathir. But I'm not exactly clear on why you're appealing to what Ibn Kathir may cite, even though in the same text, Ibn Kathir refers to other people besides Bukhari who hold the opposite opinion that you yourself are arguing for. So, like, what does this really accomplish for us?
Yeah.
Now, let's try to be shorter in our back and forth here.
See, again, Dr. This is why I'm cutting you off, because you keep missing the point. I'm responding to you. You forgot what the argument was. I'm going to remind you how we felt we ended up on this rabbit trail. If you go back to the initial point, you asked me, why is it I reject Ibn Kathir? I'm going to remind you what the conversation is. See, you keep bringing up additional points and I have to jump with you. I don't mind jumping. I need to lose weight. I've been gaining weight, so I got to lose. I want to look like camera. Let me remind you how we got here. You mentioned Ibn Kathir in chapter 12, verse 111. You mentioned it, that he said only a part of it. And then you asked me, why is it I accept the part of Ibn Kathir and then I reject the part of Ibn Kathir? My response was, because that's not what the verse says. He's reading into the verse. And by the way, even though Ibn Kathir holds to that position, not everyone held to that position. And you just admitted, I want everyone to hear it. You admitted, even among the Salaf, that there was two positions, that some said it was corrupt, others said it's not corrupt. But that backfires against you. If the Quran clearly teaches the scriptures are corrupt, why the confusion even among Muhammad's companions? If the Quran...
Oh my days. That is such a stupid argument. Oh my god. I'm pretty sure Jay Dyer, when he was debating Daniel, and Daniel made a point, I believe, Jay replied with, oh, but disagreement doesn't mean unclear. Just because people disagree on something doesn't mean the thing itself is unclear, right? Same way the Atharis, we wouldn't say the Quran is unclear about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes, like his yad and so on, just because there's other people who dispute what yad is, right? So in the same way, just because there's ikhtilaf or there's difference of opinion on this point, doesn't mean that it's clear, the Quran's not clear on what it teaches, right? There's so many points we can bring from disagreements from Islamic scholars where we can say the thing itself is clear, but still Islamic scholars disagree on it. So for example, there's even disagreement amongst the Salaf on whether Iblis or Shaitan was a jinn or not. Does that mean the Quran isn't clear when it says that Iblis was a jinn? No, obviously these interpretations are not on the apparent of what the Quran is saying. Another point is that you have disagreement amongst the church fathers themselves. I give a quote from Gregory of Nazianzus on one of my recent videos, where he says that people were disagreeing on the nature of the Holy Spirit. Is the Holy Spirit a force? Is the Holy Spirit an attribute of God? Is the Holy Spirit a person? There's disagreements even after the Council of Nicaea. And Gregory of Nazianzus makes this point about those that are wise. They're still disagreeing about this. So disagreement doesn't mean it's unclear. It's just a fallacy.
Quran was clearly teaching their books are corrupt. There would be no difference opinion from people who either met Muhammad or those who were taught by Muhammad's disciples. That actually backfires against you. It doesn't backfire against me. And the comment that this is referring to the preserved tablet, take that memo up with Ibn Jawziyah and Ibn Kathir, because Ibn Jawziyah cites Bukhari, Al-Razi, and others as one of the groups of ulama. This is in a long, lengthy reference that I quote. He's mentioning the Islamic view of the Torah. He says there are three views, which is relevant to our talk. He says three. Now, you and I know well that Ibn Jawziyah is coming 700 years after the reported death of Muhammad. He says even at his time, and you acknowledge this, so I'm not saying you're not, but I want.
By the way, I think even Ibn al-Qayyim makes mention that there was even a group amongst them at the time that held to the belief that everything in the Bible is corrupt. So are we now going to say that the Quran's clear now, unambiguously on the point of everything on the Quran, everything in the Bible being corrupt? Like, obviously not. These views are extremes. They're extremities. You have the view that everything's preserved and the view that everything in it's corrupt during the time of Ibn al-Qayyim. So, yeah.
The Christians hear this. You see why it's a dilemma? You guys can't get out of it. Glory to Jesus Christ. But even at the time of Ibn Jawziyah, he says there were three views regarding Torah, that it's completely corrupt. And another view says only slight modifications, but he gives the view of the middle. He says there's a view that says the Torah cannot be corrupt, it's not corrupted. And he gives the names. You want to bring up the article? You can read the Arabic. I have it. We'll do it if you want. And he says Bukhari was one of them. Al-Razi was one of them. Al-Razi and Bukhari. And then he mentions that they gave evidences to show why the Torah cannot be corrupt. One of their proofs was chapter 6, verse 115. None can change the words of Allah. Golly gee, it's not just Christians who appeal to 6:115 to show if none of the words of Allah can be corrupted, that means the Torah and the gospel can't be corrupted. This group appealed to your Quran to say Torah, gospel, words of Allah cannot be corrupted, to prove the Torah on earth, not the one in heaven that no one has access to on earth, cannot be changed. And they also quoted the hadith of Sunan Abu Dawud. In fact, can I bring it up so people can see with their own eyes? All right, here we go. Let's see. So we went a far drift because you took me a far drift and you still didn't answer the question. I'm still waiting for an answer for 566-68. So hopefully we go back to that, and then I have something to talk about the creative words which you denied that the Quran teaches. Au contraire. And if you want the Arabic, I'll let you read the Arabic here. Here it is. Right here, black and white. Let me enlarge it. Boom. Here goes. Right here, enlarge it as large as I can, so people can see. Right here, where am I quoting? And the Arabic text is right here. Here's the Arabic. Now watch. He mentions the middle view. On the other side, another party of Hadith and fiqh scholars said that these changes took place during its interpretation, not during the process of its revelation. This view is the view of Abi Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ishmael al-Bukhari, who said in his Hadith collection, surprise, David, my boy David, whom I love. He's saying Bukhari's not talking about the heavenly tablet. He's talking about the Torah on earth, and he cites this. And then he mentions Al-Razi as also saying wholesale corruption of scriptures is impossible because of tawattur, because it was spread all over the world. Well, I'm not saying you have to agree with Razi. I'm saying the view that best comports with the Quran wins out. Your view doesn't comport with the Quran, so I have to read into it. But here, the Hadith. Abu Dawud narrated in his collection that Ibn Umar said, a group of Jewish people invited the Messenger of Allah to a house. When he came, they asked him, oh, Abu Qasim, one of our men committed adultery with a woman. What is your judgment against him? So they placed the pillow and asked the Messenger of Allah to sit on it, meant to say sit. And the Messenger of Allah proceeded to say, bring me the Torah. When they brought it, he removed the pillow from underneath him and placed the Torah on it and said, I believe in you and in the one who revealed you. Then said, bring me one of you who have the most knowledge. So they brought him a young man who told him the story of the stoning. Now, this group of scholars here, this is Ibn Qayyim, not me. The scholar said, if the Torah was corrupted, he, your prophet, would not have placed it on the pillow and would have not said, I believe in you, the one who revealed in you. He's talking about their copy, not the one in heaven. Now watch the verse they quote. This group of scholars also said, Allah said, and the word of your Lord has been accomplished truly and justly. There is none who can change his words, and he is a hearing and knowing. And what did they conclude? The Torah is Allah's word. So they're appealing to the Quran and the Hadith to show the one on earth, not this imaginary heavenly one, that cannot be corrupted. So to remind you, I only went on this rabbit trail because you accuse me of selectively citing Ibn Kathir, just like you selectively cite him, even though as an Ismaili, you're not bound to his opinion. And my grounds for rejecting part of the statement is because the Quran contradicts his position. So do you want me to go with his opinion over against the Quran? All right, then the Quran is wrong, Ibn Kathir is right. But you didn't answer my question. You know that, Andani.
Can I respond now?
Go ahead.
Okay, so now we actually have gone on a tangent, but Sam, I asked you, the original question was, where does the Quran affirm the 27-book New Testament? You agreed with me. You agreed with me that the Quranic gospel is only what Jesus was given and what Jesus taught. That's the definition of Injil in the Quran. We all agree. But your Islamic dilemma, the first premise is the Quran affirms the divine inspiration, divine authority, and preservation of the New Testament. Now, the New Testament is a library of 27 different books by, I don't know how many, many different authors, okay? That is, so the burden, if you claim with your dilemma that the Quran affirms the New Testament, the burden of proof is on you to show that the Quran confirms the 27-book New Testament. Now, that's already hard because the Quran makes no reference to the 27-book canon of the New Testament, and it never actually confirms it, right? So your answer to the burden of proof that you have was...
And just the clarification for those that did hold that view about the Torah being preserved because and using that hadith as evidence, one, you could reinterpret the hadith, but secondly, even if we were to grant that the hadith says what Sam's trying to say, it says in terms of the Torah being absolutely preserved, well, the hadith's inauthentic. So if scholars did hold to this view that it was completely preserved because of this hadith, they were misled by the fact that they believe this hadith was authentic when the evidence points towards it not being authentic. So again, like if he's going to bring up this view as though it's the most apparent view, it's the most scholarly view, well, no, like we give scholarly reasons on why it's not apparent and why it's not justified by the fact that the evidence they bring is one, weak in terms of the substance from the Quran, and two, the actual chains itself or the hadith as evidence is not strong. So we have precedents now to take the other view over this one, and scholars that may have held to this view because of this sort of reasoning were misled by the fact that the hadith is inauthentic. And regardless, Ibn al-Qayyim mentioning al-Razi and Bukhari, as I proved before, they aren't good examples. I'm still yet to see one prominent Sunni scholar who held to this view that was absolutely preserved. I'm still yet to see that.
To ask me a question, and you asked me, what is the word? How do you know the Torah is the Kitab of Musa? And then we went down on this rabbit hole, and you brought up. Okay, so here's the thing. I'm very happy for you that you think Fakhruddin Razi affirms that the scriptures can't be corrupted. You can take your Islamic dilemma and give it to Razi. You can give it to Ibn Qayyim. You can give it to whoever else you've cited. You can give it to Bukhari. Now, the problem with giving it to Bukhari is Bukhari also quotes a hadith from Ibn Abbas, where Ibn Abbas says that Allah has told you that the Ahlul Kitab, the Jews and Christians, changed their scripture and distorted it and wrote the scripture, the Kitab, with their own hands. And this is basically a commentary.
You misquoted Ibn Abbas. I just read you.
It does say that.
No, it doesn't.
You are reading something else from what I'm reading.
No, I know the hadith where it says, "Why do you go ask them?"
Yes, it said they exchanged. It said they changed and altered the
Who's
Kitab.
they? Did you hear the quotation I gave you from Whittingham? Do you want me to read it?
I'm reading a hadith. Can I show the hadith?
Sure, and I'm going to show you the response to it, but you didn't listen to it.
Again, but the point is that Bukhari himself.
Well, and the funny thing is, if Sam concedes that people at the time of the Prophet were distorting the Torah, right, and that's what they had in their possession, then he also has to concede to the fact that the Quran is only confirming parts. Because if the people at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were holding Torahs that contained corruptions, particularly only for them, and not for the whole world or for generally everyone, which is fine. We can grant him that. That still proves that when the Quran says it's confirming what's in your hands, it's not wholesale confirming, because parts of what is in their hands is corruption that they wrote into their books. So he still has to grant the fact that the Quran isn't confirming absolutely everything, unless he wants to say that the Quran itself is contradicting itself in preceding verses that gave it context, right? Which obviously that's being highly, highly uncharitable. So 279 effectively proves this point. People are writing books claiming it's from Allah, it's in their possessions, and they're treating it as scripture, and they're using it as scripture, and they're calling it the Torah or whatever else they want to title it, scripture. And yet the Quran is saying that those are false books, those things aren't scripture, and it's saying that it's confirming what's in their hands. So this isn't a wholesale confirmation, even by granting Sam's really weird interpretation of that hadith. It still proves that the Quran isn't confirming wholesale in what they have.
is citing different opinions of Ibn Abbas. And actually, the source you quoted, Whittingham, says right at the beginning of the paragraph that there is material that asserts textual corruption. So here's the thing: you can take your Islamic dilemma and you can take it to somebody like Razi because he agrees with your premise. But what I will not accept is when you say Ibn Kathir is wrong because he doesn't follow the Quran, but apparently the Quran is whatever you, Sam, say the Quran means. So that's basically what you're doing. You're presupposing that your reading of the Quran is right, but I dispute that.
We are going on tangents now. Can we get to the issue?
We are, but I think it's important to point out for the listeners as well that you and I disagree on what the Quran means. You and I, we disagree, and that's okay.
Sure.
But for your dilemma to work, I'm the first wall. So if you want to get past the first wall, right, you have to convince me without appealing to any exegete. You have to convince me based on critical Quranic study scholarship that the Quran affirms the New Testament. That's what you're going to have to do.
Can I get to it without you repeating the same point? Because I was trying to get to it.
I'm not repeating, but let me continue. So the burden of proof to affirm the New Testament in the Quranic view is on the person making the claim, which is you. Now, I'm going to say this again.
Get to it.
Walid Saleh, who I quoted on my slide, says that the academic consensus on the Quran is that it asserts the textual corruption of prior revelations. That's Walid Saleh speaking for a lot of scholars. And if you're interested, Sidney Griffith. Sidney Griffith? You've cited him before.
And then, you're filibustering and you're killing time. Can we get to the issue?
Can I actually ask a question? I've been pretty quiet. So what is the point of that, Khalil, pointing out that the scholarly consensus is that there's a corruption in the New Testament? Because I mean, for someone like Sam, like he's not gonna because I think one of the points you made earlier is that charitably you would assume that
What that shows, Cameron, is that academics with no bias, for the most part, I've only seen one, I believe Gabriel Said Reynolds, where he believes that the Quran is silent on whether it's confirming the Injil or not, which I don't agree with, and is opposed to the general view in academia, as Khalil cited. What this proves is that the apparent reading of the Quran is that what they have in their possession isn't wholesale from God. If academics are even saying this, not Muslims, then that proves to you that it's more apparent from the text. They're treating it as the actual perspective of the Quranic author within its historical context. Right. So this is a very important point. The fact that even academics are holding to the same view that the general Muslim would hold to.
that these two things are consistent, right? What we find in 566 and then the scholarly consensus that there's corruption. But from Sam's position, he might just hold that there's a contradiction here. And so that's a reason.
If you ask the question,
no, so what I'm saying is that Sam believes that the Quran affirms the New Testament. That's his belief. Your whole dilemma has to ride on that. But number one, this has not been demonstrated positively.
You haven't let me demonstrate it. You keep
Sam, look, you cite all these Mufassirun. Guess what?
No, I want to cite the Quran.
Hold on. You cited Bukhari on the Torah. Okay, you cited Josiah on the Torah. You cited Razi on the Torah. But you know what? None of them believed in the New Testament canon. The most charitable view that you find in Muslim history from Biqai, 15th century, is that the four Gospels preserve the revelation.
Just have a monologue and just sit back. I mean,
I might be interrupted though.
Because
I do want to hear him finish his thought here, and then after that, let's do this. Let's come back over to Sam to give us his positive case.
He's not finishing the thought. He's going about what I brought up. And I brought up these Sunni scholars that he disagrees with. So he's not addressing your question. He's now telling me what I did and how I failed to prove my point. Because he hasn't let me prove my point. Because every time I go to
none of the scholars you appeal to believe in the New Testament canon. The most charitable opinion that you find is A, the Torah is preserved, and B, from Biqai, and it's a minority, that the fourfold gospel has preserved the words of Jesus. That's it. None of these people cited the New Testament canon as revealed by God in the first place.
So what is your, Khalil, what is your response to my question?
Yeah, he didn't answer you. He filibustered. Exactly.
Your question was about academic consensus, right?
No, it was about, so I was questioning why you were bringing that up, not just about the consensus itself. Why are you bringing that up? Because, and what I also added onto that in Surah 566, the verse that Sam was appealing to in terms of like his positive case, why the Quran refers to the New Testament, and then you appealed to the scholarship saying that it was, it's corrupted. So why would the Quran affirm the New Testament and then also admit that it was corrupted? That's a scholarly consensus.
There's no New Testament in 566 or 568.
Can I make my case to show you wrong?
That's not what I was saying. That's not what I was saying. I was asking why are you mentioning the consensus? Because for someone like Sam, he doesn't accept that the Quran has to be consistent.
Okay, but
itself.
Sam doesn't. So the thing is this: if you read any text, you have to read it holistically. You don't read one part of the text in isolation from the other part of the text. Nobody we don't read the Gospel of Mark that way. We don't read the Gospel of John that way. So we can't artificially split up the Quran into different parts and then say, oh, each one taken in isolation contradicts. You have to read the Quran holistically. And I don't trust people like Sam to do that because, no offense, you guys are doing polemics. So what we can go to, and Sam doesn't trust me or other because I'm a Muslim. Sam doesn't trust me. Okay, so now if you don't trust me and you don't trust Sam because maybe we have our own agendas, and everybody does, right? I can at least point out that there is an academic majority who believe the Quran does teach the corruption of prior revelations. That's it. And once that's on the table, we still lack a positive argument from Sam or David Wood that the 27-book New Testament is affirmed by the Quran. Now, Sam, I know you want to say something about that, so why don't you go ahead?
Cameron, brother, when you ask him a question, you give him another. Now, this has been 10 minutes. He's been going on. I've been
Well,
trying
no,
to.
I think he did. I think he did answer. I mean, I would have
What's
wanted
ironic
a
here?
different answer, but
Okay, now, Cameron, I want you to remember. I want everyone to go back to this presentation. Cameron, maybe I didn't hear him correctly because I was probably busy writing. Which could you remind me without him interrupting me because I want to go to the point? Didn't he say that one possible plausible interpretation is that the Quran does confirm the New Testament? It's just been misinterpreted. Wasn't that one of the points? Even though he doesn't hold to that point when he brought it up on his slide. So here you want to have your cake and eat it too again. You're first telling us. See,
I don't.
well, he was
no,
giving different options.
I don't appreciate doing straw man, Sam. If I give 3 options and I say I believe in option 1, you can't come and say, oh, you're contradicting yourself.
Yeah.
Let's do this instead of kind of go back and forth on this. Let's now talk about your positive case for Sam. Why
bring
you
up,
think
bring
that
up my article, Mary Marco. I mean, Andani, please. I know it can get heated, but brother, my brother, take it easy, man. I'm gonna get to
it's not heated. You keep saying it's heated. It's not heated.
Yeah, Sam, maybe the heat is on too much at your house, man. You should.
Oh man, it's very hot and I need to use plate. But anyway,
are you sweating? Is there some sweat there? Maybe turn on the AC, man.
Let me know, guys, when you want me to make my case. I'll be waiting.
Make it, Sam. You got it.
Are you sure, Cameron? Because now you're no, it's okay. It's your platform. Do not wait.
Take it easy. Take it easy. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. Here is what I was trying to show, which again, because we went on 5,000 tangents and he never addressed it. So I'm going to try it again. Here's the positive case. Please hear me out. I said that the Quran says it confirms what is with them. And here again, 566, 68. And I'm not going with the translation. Forget the translation. Had they followed the Torah and the gospel and what was revealed to them from their Lord, and then it says you have nothing unless you follow the Torah and the gospel and what was revealed to you, God revealed to you. This invites an historical inquiry. An historical inquiry. If I was going to follow the disruptive method, I want to now know what the Jews and Christians had at the time of this passage, because the passage is telling not you, Andani, to read your view of what the Quran is saying, not saying, it's telling the Jews and the Christians, you have nothing to stand on unless you follow the Torah, the gospel, and all the revelation given to you. So now my question, which you didn't answer, and I'm still waiting for the answer, this 15 minutes, you didn't answer it. Historically, what did they have? Because not just the Torah and the gospel. You want to deny the gospel is the New Testament, fine, I'll give you that. You want to deny the Torah is anything other than Moses, I'll even grant you that. But it's this part, Andani, what was revealed to them, not to you, to them. You have nothing unless you follow the old and Torah and gospel, and that which God has revealed to you. So what was revealed to them? So who am I going to ask? I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to ask the Jews and Christians. What was revealed to you? By golly, even if you want to include the Apocrypha, I'll give you all that. Man, I'll give you the pseudepigrapha. I'll give you Enoch. They still had the New Testament, and there's nothing in this passage that qualifies it. So could you answer the question, which I've been trying to get you to answer? Please explain to us non-Muslims. Explain to us non-Muslims. What was all the revelation that the Jews and Christians had at the time? At that time, tell us historically. Don't give us.
I think Khalil did give a good response to this, from what I remember. He gives 2 responses. But there's even a third response you can give, which is what was revealed to them from their Lord includes things outside of the Torah and Gospel, which is like similar to the Sunnah. So you'd have tradition passed down in the Talmud, for example, or traditions about what Moses practiced or other prophets would have practiced, or extra biblical oral traditions of what Jesus would have preached, which would be distinct from the Injil, which would be like his Sunnah or whatever it might be. So that's also a possible way to explain it, but if not this as an explanation, I think those 2 explanations are also good as well.
What's your theology? Go ahead.
Okay, so firstly, there are 2 options here. Well, actually, there's 3. Number 1, this could refer to past revelation of past prophets. Obviously, it's not referring to present revelation. I don't know any Jews and Christian claiming that they have new bishops receiving revelation in the 7th century. So it's not referring to revelation that's actually being given to different prophets at that time. Okay, so it's not that. So it can only either refer to a past revelation. For example, Jews and Christians have revelation from other prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and so on. So it can refer to that. Okay, it can also refer to the Quran, because parts of the Quran are sent down for Jews and Christians. right? Many verses begin with, "O people of the book." So there's a good portion of the Quran, including in Surah 5, verse 15, that Surah 5, verse 15 begins with, "O people of the book, O people of the Kitab." So that's an example of what has been sent down to the people of the Kitab within the Quran. And actually, many commentators believe that that phrase, "what has been revealed to you or to them from their Lord," refers to the Quran. A third option is that the phrase, "what was revealed to them or what is revealed to you from your Lord," that is a specification. So sometimes in Arabic, you have the word "and," the word "wow," and what follows that is not a third object. It's just a specification, a description of the other two objects that were mentioned. So the same verse, what says to Jesus, he will teach him the kitab, the hikmah, and the Torah and the Injil. The third wow, the third "and" in that verse is understood by many as a wow of specification. So in this case, then, it's just an additional description of the Torah and the gospel. The other thing I would say is that Surah 5, which I know you guys are big fans of, Surah 5 is telling Jews and Christians to follow the law of the Torah and the gospel. It's not telling them to follow the theology of the Torah and the gospel.
Damn, yeah, I can't lie. Even though Khalil's not a Muslim, we don't consider him to be Muslim. Those are all valid takes someone can have on what was being said. Sam gave us a possible interpretation. We come back at him with Khalil brought three, and I brought a fourth interpretation. So that shows you how weak his justification is on this being the New Testament, right? Trying to justify that what has been revealed to you from your Lord has to include the New Testament books.
Gospel. Even the earlier verse, and I had a slide on this too, when it says judge, let the people of the gospel judge by what God has sent down therein, is talking about law.
Okay.
So the funny thing is, you guys don't even follow the law, right? So we have academic studies by Mohsen Goodarzi and by Holger Zelentin. Holger Zelentin has an entire book on this. The Quran is commanding Jews and Christians to follow the dietary laws and the penal laws. And the great irony of a Christian bringing these verses forward as an argument for the Christian position is that you don't even follow the dietary laws that have been given to you in the Torah and the gospel.
Because you changed it to chapter 5, which I'll address you very beautifully. But let me go back.
Bringing these verses doesn't show that. Now, again, I'm going to repeat my request. Where in the Quran?
Because you made up 4 points. Can I address them? Then you can repeat your request.
Well, your address is so you're supposed to answer my question. Where does the Quran confirm the divine revelation, authority, and preservation of the 27 book New Testament? Where is it?
Yeah. Okay. Now let me put holes here.
Which Muslim exegete actually affirmed the New Testament besides a modernist like Sayyid?
You can please, brother, respect yourself. Let me.
It's Andani. It's not.
Can you step in, brother? Because you're John. You let this guy just filibuster talk over me. This is unprofessional.
My name is be mispronounced. I should correct it, right?
Okay.
I don't call you.
Khalil Andani. All right. Everyone.
If you want to end it, let's end it because it's getting nowhere. Because you're letting him talk over me. I want to address this.
He actually muted himself. He muted himself, so we're good to go.
Good. Okay. Now, number one, I want you to notice the admission. He did admit that this can refer to the books like Isaiah and Daniel, which means it can refer to the New Testament. Thank you for that admission. Number two, your first point is a straw man. No one says that this is referring to revelation given at that time, meaning that they had prophets with revelation. It's obviously speaking of the revelation given in the past that's in their possession. Thirdly, even though you made a big deal out of the wa conjunction, but again, contextually, you have to define the conjunction. Contextually, it says the Torah, wa Injil, wa and. Now, even in your view, the gospel is not identical to the Torah, even though you believe it's revelation given to Jesus, and that's the wisdom given to him, where he exhorts people to uphold the Torah. In the context, clearly, and Torah and Injil and Revelation, they are three different aspects of that revelation. They're not one and the same. Moreover, even if you want to include the Quran, even if you want to say it's saying, hey, it's the Quran, you got to follow the Quran, still, that would entail following everything they had, not just the Quran. And since you went to the commentators, guys, did you hear it? He went to the commentators. Let's see. You went to the commentators, but you're going to say, well, I'm an Ismaili, and let's go to academics. Let's quote this academic here and there. All right. So let's see. It concedes your interpretation, but also says this, right? If they had observed the Torah gospel, if they had accepted what is in the Torah gospel, demonstrate the traits and description of Muhammad contained therein, and that which was revealed unto them from the Lord, and had they elucidated that which their Lord had explained to them in the Torah gospel, it is also said that this means if they had believed that all the scriptures and messengers are from their Lord, all the scriptures and messengers, not just Quran, whatever scriptures, the messengers, and by the way, in chapter 4, verse 164, it says there are messengers that Allah did not mention by name. So by a rule, you're in no position to reject a book by some messenger, believed by the Jews and Christians, just because he's not mentioned by name. Because 4164 tells you there are messengers not mentioned by name. So you're in no position to say we reject this. So what grounds do you reject the New Testament? Here again, 568. All scriptures given to all messengers. Now coming back to you, jumping to 543:48, you're saying, we Christians, how dare we quote the Quran that says follow by the law of the gospel when you're told to uphold the dietary restrictions? Andani, how would the Christians know what the gospel exhorts them to follow if they didn't have it at the time of Muhammad? So you just proved my point. That means the gospel must be there for them to know that the law of the gospel exhorts them to follow the dietary restrictions, which means they had the gospel of Jesus. So I'm going to ask you, what was that gospel? And finally, read your Quran in context. You accuse me of reading out of context? I guess you forgot chapter 3, verse 50, where it says that Jesus not only confirmed the Torah before him, but he made lawful some of the things that were unlawful. So if I follow your argument, then I believe the Quran. That means Jesus made things lawful for his followers that were forbidden for the followers of the Jews. And hence 543 to 48 doesn't make your case, it makes my case. That's why the Christians follow the law of the gospel, because it assumes there are things in it that the previous Torah either forbade or allowed. So we follow the law of the gospel. And that's why Muslims follow the law of the Quran. But again, if your argument is to work, Andani, sorry, I'm not trying to deliberately mispronounce your name. You can call me Shamoun. I won't get offended. That's not a point. In 546 and 47, how could the Christians at the time of Muhammad even know what the law of the gospel is if that law of the gospel of Jesus wasn't preserved by Muhammad? So here you have Revelations. Historically, they had the New Testament. You can't get around this. And secondly, if they had the law of the gospel at the time of Muhammad, surely they knew what the gospel was. So I'm going to bring it back to you. What was that gospel? I'm going to bring it back to you.
You're still muted. Let me unmute you, see if you can. Oh, it looks like now I've muted you. Okay, now you're back.
So in Surah 5 and in Surah 3, the Quran defines the gospel as the teaching of Jesus. You already agreed to that. In Surah 5, it tells them to follow and judge by the gospel, which means the teaching of Jesus. So the answer, of course, is very easy. The legal teaching of Jesus, which I said in my slide on option 1, I said the gospel of Jesus is embedded within the 4 gospels. You can find it in there, but it's not coextensive with it.
And actually, you can find, I believe later on, I'm not going to include this part because I think it's in the Q&A section, but Ibn Ishaq interpreted the gospel as being the gospel of John. And we have also Muqatil bin Sulaiman on this actual verse, one of the earliest tafsir, I think it is the earliest tafsir work that we have preserved. Muqatil bin Sulaiman commentates on chapter 5, verse 47, that to implement the gospel here is a judicial implementation, as Khalil was saying. Muqatil bin Sulaiman says that the implementation here will be forgiving someone and pardoning the person that oppressed you, and so on and so forth. I'll have to pull it up, but 100% I remember in my research that Muqatil bin Sulaiman commentates on 547 about the Injil, the Christians being encouraged to implement Injil. It is to pardon the person that wrongs you, right? So these sort of ethical teachings that you do find across the Gospels, where Jesus says to like turn the other cheek and so on. The Quran is saying for them to implement that sort of judicial implementation, right? So this is what's being spoken of here, as Khalil said, and same thing with the Torah. Muqatil, also one of the earliest tafsirs, as I said, also makes mention of the Torah here, implementing it in terms of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and so on. As well as we have traditions for the tafsir of this verse concerning stoning the adulterer as well. So the context here, the earliest understanding of the Muslims, the hadiths on this issue, it's all in the context of implementing judicial law. And as well, a last point as well concerning this, that it's a general implementation of the law. It doesn't even mean that has to be an absolute implementation. I think Khalil already made it clear that where it's going to be found, and this is where a lot of Christians, I don't know why they make it seem like it's ambiguous. It's not ambiguous what the gospel is. It's the teachings of Jesus, peace be upon him. The judicial laws he would have preached. Keep the law of Moses, as well as him having a more loose interpretation of it compared to the stricter interpretation that the Jews had at his time, and emphasizing more of the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. So this is what it means by implementing the Injil.
Now, if you were to follow the law taught by Jesus, you would be following a lot of the Jewish laws. At least the Jewish Christians would have to follow certain laws. They'd have to follow the whole Torah, basically, except what Jesus has abrogated. And if you're a Gentile Christian, you should not be eating unclean meat. So do you have pepperoni pizza or do you not? And if you're a Jewish Christian, right, you have to follow the Torah. That's what Jesus taught. So again, what I think you keep doing here is you keep eliding the idea of the New Testament collection with the Quranic idea of the gospel, and these are not the same thing.
It's not what I'm doing.
Well, I think you are. So they're not the same thing. So when the Quran uses a word and it defines it, and then it uses the same word in the same surah.
Okay, actually, I have the exact quote from Muqatil I can share now. I was just searching for it. So I have it in the context of my video on Testify. So here we go.
Authoritative words. For instance, Surah 547 says, "And let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the defiantly disobedient."
There's truth of the Gospels that would be advocated for by the Quran, such as being merciful against your enemies. This is mentioned in our earliest tafsir work we have, being Muqatil bin Sulaiman. But also, the truth in the Gospels to judge with consists of prophecies of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Allah SWT is advocating for Christians to recognize this.
The Christians, instructing them to use.
Yeah, so that's the quote about pardoning the murderer, the wounder, and the attacker. So as I was saying before. So that's our earliest tafsir work we have. I believe Muqatil comes around 100, I think it's 130 AH, if I'm not mistaken.
Many verses later, we don't forget the Quranic definition of the word and then read in New Testament. We have to track the Quranic definition of the word. And the primary problem with the Islamic dilemma, as you put it, is your first premise is the Quran affirms the revelation, authority, and preservation of a 27-book New Testament.
It does.
And the only thing that the Quran affirms is a gospel taught by Jesus. The Quran also says that a party among the children of Israel, which includes Christians, by the way, forged kitab. They wrote something and they said, this is from Allah. So your New Testament, from a Muslim perspective, is a mixture of the authentic teaching of Jesus plus things written about Jesus, as well as, and you brought this up, you know, this whole thing of corruption of the interpretation. Well, the problem is the New Testament technically is a memory account of the teaching of Jesus, which has been transmitted like hadith, plus second, third, fourth generation interpretation of the teaching of Jesus. In the New Testament, both of this is mixed together. So even if you follow the minority view, which says the Christians corrupted the interpretation, but they kept the verbatim revelation, even if I grant that, your canon is a mixture of revelation and corrupt interpretation. They've been mixed together. So what the Quran allows you to do is it allows Muslims as well as contemporary Jews or Christians to recover some of that authentic gospel of Jesus. How do you do it? The Quran itself is supposed to serve as the arbiter and the criterion. And that's not just my opinion. I quoted at the end of my presentation, Nikolai Sinai, who's not a Muslim. He himself said the Quran sees itself as the ultimate arbiter of all the prior scriptures and what they mean and what they're supposed to mean. So that is how you recover the original gospel. The other way to recover the original gospel, which we can do today, is if we use the historical critical method that I use to understand the Quran, if we apply that to the New Testament and to the four Gospels, we will be able to recover in high probability what the authentic teaching of Jesus was and what the other stuff that is just interpretation is.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's get Sam
Number
back
one.
in here. Real quick, hold your thoughts if you can. I want to address the audience really
I don't want to
quickly.
forget his points because he just. Okay, but I don't want to forget his point. Yeah, what is it? How
Right,
much
just
time?
really quickly. That's the thing, is that I need to discuss timing and go into some Q&A really quickly. So if you guys do want to send in a super chat, that's the way to ask your question. We're about to transition to Q&A in just a little bit here.
Well, so one thing, just for the sake of a good discussion. So look, we and Sam, we don't see eye to eye on this, and that's okay. That's fine. I would be interested if Sam is up for it. Sam, you know, you've said, for example, and this is just an opportunity for me,
Before
right?
you can I address you so I don't forget your points and you can ask me later?
Sure.
Okay. Number one, no one. The Quran is not talking about you, what you can do today. See, you're again either not listening to the argument, and you're throwing out smoke and mirrors. The Quran is talking to the Christians at the time, Muhammad. You're not living at that time, so it is irrelevant what critical scholarship in the 21st century think they can do in recovering the gospel. You're not the audience of the Quran. It's referring to the Christians at the time of Muhammad. So to then read back into that modern historical critical scholarship or historical methods to try to find the gospel, that's anachronistic. That's the first error in your logic. Secondly, you then applied a passage where it says that the children of Israel, a part of them, wrote a book of them, and then ipso facto, that includes the Christians. Where did you get that from? It's about the children of Israel. But even if I grant that to you, You're accusing me of reading the Quran selectively. You're the one reading the Quran selectively, because there may have been a party who did that, but the same Quran says, chapter 3, 113 and 114, not all of them are alike. So I'm using the Quran to refute your taking verses out of context. And I'm the Christian. You're the one supposed to be doing that. Not all of them are alike. Of the people of the book are a portion that stand for the right. They rehearse the signs of God all night long, and they prostrate themselves in adoration. They believe in God and the last day. They enjoin what is right, forbid what is wrong. They hasten in emulation all good works. They are in the ranks of the righteous. And then 3:199. And there are certainly among the people of the book those who believe in God in relation to you and in relation to them, bowing in humility to God. They will not sell the signs of God for miserable gain. For them is a reward with their Lord, and God is swift in account. So even if I grant the way you read into that text, children of Israel means the Christians, that's a group of them. But there was another group that would not sell the signs, that recited their revelation, and supposedly also believe the Quran. I'll even grant that. I'm very generous and charitable. So that didn't help your case. But now 547, let the people of the gospel judge what God had revealed therein. You conveniently said that, yeah, that means that the gospel of Jesus was contained New Testament, but the Quran does not confirm the New Testament. Only those aspects of Jesus' teaching. Now, we got a problem, friend.
Yeah, he keeps using the term New Testament here. Like, Khalil never used the term New Testament when he was explaining the Injil. Like, so many times, he made it very clear that it's only the Gospels and even parts of the Gospels, not entirely. And he just consistently makes mention of the New Testament as though it's synonymous with what Khalil was saying concerning it being the Gospels.
If the New Testament is a corrupt text, then how is it that a corrupt text can be trusted to preserve the core of Jesus's teachings, and that to know that those are the teachings of Christ without 21st century standards of historical criticism, which did not exist at the time of Muhammad? In other words, by extension, if the gospel of Jesus is in the New Testament, or at least the Gospels, and that's where you'll find the authentic teaching of Jesus, then by extension, that means those books must be preserved to be trusted, to know that you're getting the teachings of Jesus. But now you want to go back and say, well, it was third, fourth generation, but you're burying the Quran then. If even what is in the New Testament doesn't actually preserve the authentic teachings of Jesus, you just made null and void this verse, because this verse has no meaning, no application historically, which means the Quran is speaking incoherent babble. Finally, you like to appeal to academic scholarship like Nicholas Sanai. I'll do you better. I will quote the study Quran Muslims saying that 548 doesn't imply what you suggest. Now, Cameron, let me bring it up, because he's saying, see, 548 means for the Muslim, the Quran is muhaymin alayh, which means we
Really, this is getting very daunting. Like, anytime Khalil would give an interpretation that is valid, not just valid, but very reasonable and consistent, he just gives a different interpretation. Like, it's just becoming very irritating at this point. At any given point, okay, I'm giving you my position about the Bible being corrupt, but then he goes and says, "Oh well, but Islamic scholars have differed on this." Like, okay, like, how does that undermine my position? He,
use the Quran to determine what's true in the gospel. That's a misreading of the context. And I'm going to let the Muslims, not Nicholas Sinai, your Muslim scholars, study Quran, make my case for me. Let me just bring it up. So you have said nothing, Khalil. I'm still waiting for good arguments that historically the relation given to them would have been the New Testament. All your
Sam, you have to prove that to me. You still haven't done that.
For those who have
really quickly, we are going to transition to Q&A. So actually, I think we're going to have to leave this last section for Sam, and then Khalil, if you want to ask him your question that you originally wanted to ask, and then we'll move to Q&A. Which during the Q&A section, there's still going to be more time to chat and talk and discuss these issues. So by no means is the conversation over.
Yeah, let me just get this for him, and then finally, and if you want to engage me, Khalil, because you said the Quran denies that Jesus is creative logos, I'd like to discuss that with you.
Well, I wanted to, you said earlier, you said on your articles and your podcast or whatever, that the Quran doesn't deny the Trinity. Do you still hold to that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we should start with that.
Well, yeah, well, that will be part of discussion.
I was also interested in chatting a better understanding, because you're very interested also in the Quran upholding the Torah, because you have an argument out of Genesis 18 and 19 about that God or Yahweh is multi-personal. But I wanted to get some clarity on that from you, so I wanted to also chat with you about that.
Sure. You want to discuss this? Sure. Okay. Now here, the study Quran on 543 to 48. Guys, he quoted Nicholas Sinai. He's an academic, but these are also academic scholars, and they're Muslims. Study Quran. Guys, watch. Let me read it. Page 298. Verses 43, 44, study Quran. Remember, these are modern academic Muslim scholars, so you can't say, well, they're Sunnis. And no, because you even had Shia involved in this study Quran. You can reject them, that's fine. But this verse then, along with verses 44, 47, indicates that the Torah and the Gospel remain valid sources of moral legal judgment and guidance for Jews and Christians, respectively, even after the coming of the prophet, indeed, even in his presence. See also verse 68, where the people of the book are likewise enjoined to observe their scriptures. All right, now look what it says about 46, 47. Then we're going to read 48. In the present verse, both Jesus and the gospel he brings are separately described as confirming the Torah.
Sam, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I already read this, and actually, I don't have a problem with this. But I would
Yeah,
direct you when it says at the beginning, moral and legal judgment, and that's what I was saying. That's how I started this whole discussion of Surah 5. I said these verses are about legal judgments, but what you guys do with your dilemma.
Yeah, let's let Sam finish his point here about this, and then like I said, we do need to turn to Q&A. So if I've got to mute people, I've got to.
It's a little bit unfair that when he talks, he reads out like an entire page of a URL,
and you speak
about really wrong, and I don't do that.
Well, you're welcome to do that if you want to. We can share your screen very easily.
But the thing is, like, I've already read this article. It's already published.
Well, it's not just you though that's participating here. It's also a huge audience. So let's let them understand his point as well.
This is confirming what I said. I said it's about legal rulings. That's exactly.
All right. I'm gonna have to mute Khalil here. All right, let's go.
Come on, Khalil, you're better than this. No, let me remind you of the point, guys. Did you hear him? He said 548. He mentioned 548, and he quoted Nicholas Sinai saying that the Quran is the criterion for Muslims to judge those parts of the Torah and the Gospel. That's why I'm reading it. If you read it, that means you know the response and you made it anyway. So now let me refute the response. It's not just about you, it's about the audience. So guys, is that what 548 says? Here you go. This verse addresses the prophet directly and describes the book sent down to him, that is the Quran, as confirming the book that came before it, just as the gospel confirms the Torah. The Quran is also described as confirming earlier scriptures. The Quran is further described as a protector over the previous scriptures. Now watch, these are Muslims, meaning that the Quran testifies to the validity of the earlier scriptures and serves as their trustee, keeper, and guardian. Nothing about corruption. So let me finish it. The idea of the Quran as guardian, keeper, previous revelation consistent with 541c, 545c, which report that the prophet ordered the sentence of stoning for the two idolaters, as well as retribution for killing and injury. Let me skip that part. Let's go here, because I don't want to eat up time. Alternately, it could mean that he should judge the people of the book according to what God has sent down to them, meaning, namely their own scriptures. The Quran being the criterion is telling Muhammad, tell them to follow their scriptures, is exactly the context of 543 to 47. Does an incident discussed in verses 41, 43. Although verses 41, 47 taken together suggest the ability of the Jews and Christians judging by their own scriptures, and thus containing spiritual guidance to be found in those scriptures, the verse goes further by asserting the provincial nature of different religious communities and their distinct laws and practices. You can give me Nicholas and I'll give you the Muslim scholars of study Quran that disagree. So there you go. And I didn't say, just correct it, I know you said legal judgments, but again, how can they know what the legal judgments of Jesus are if they don't have his authentic gospel? I think.
But again, that's a different point. That's not the Islamic dilemma. Like, oh my god. The way like Sam can't work like on an academic sphere because man, he's just jumping. He doesn't stay consistent on one point. The whole point here is on the Islamic dilemma, and he's bringing up about okay, like how the Quran is getting it wrong on. I guess he's trying to say like circular. It's being circular in the sense that it's telling the Christians to use the Quran as a criterion, or that they won't have a criterion at all otherwise on being able to tell what the Quran wants them to judge by or not. But I think Khalil does mention it. But the basic response is that the Christian, I believe it's a Jew actually, a Jew comes to the Prophet and asks for his judgment, and the Prophet is giving a response from his perspective to judge by what he has in the Torah. So this is the Prophet's own reply to what the Jews asking for, right? And then obviously the Quran's perspective on what the Jews should implement and the Prophet's perspective would be whatever's in conformity with the Quran. So that's not circular because it's a response based on them asking the Prophet a question. So this is from the Prophet's paradigm, and this is from Allah's perspective. And yeah, so this isn't a matter of it being circular at all. And anyways, this isn't the Islamic dilemma. As I said, this is a different argument.
I think it's over by now, but go ahead. You can have the final word.
Right, Khalil. So the only thing, well, I guess Sam, if you're okay with him having the last word, that's fine with me. But then we're gonna get to Q&A.
Okay.
Okay. So just on.
Oh, and one more point. Even if we were to say that the Quran is saying to judge by what you have with you wholesale, including what you have in your corruptions, well, what's better, like judging by human-made laws or judging by a book that has human-made laws as well as God's laws. Obviously, the latter is better from the Quranic perspective. So even in that perspective, if Jews or Christians were to come to me and they were to say, well, what laws should I implement? I'll say, yeah, you implement the laws that are found in your book that has truth, right? Better than them making up their own laws. So even from that perspective, even if it was to include the book wholesale that they have in their possession, there's even ways to explain that as well. So, but anyways, yeah, it's not the Islamic dilemma again. So I want to actually hear more on the part of the Islamic dilemma. Maybe only 10% of this whole convo actually discusses the Islamic dilemma, to be honest. And I believe the whole topic was meant to be specifically on the Injil, and somehow Sam made it for about 30 minutes on the Torah.
On this, so you audience will remember that when I gave I showed that there are 3 responses to the Islamic dilemma. Okay, now Sam, I appreciate you cited the study Quran, but they are the minority view. They're part of response number 2. Okay, so you're not really telling me anything I don't already know. I know who the authors of the study Quran are. You know, they are perennialists, and they also say in their commentary that the New Testament doesn't teach the Trinity. So you're quoting one part of the study Quran that you think is a point against me, but the same authors of the study Quran, they would dispute your entire reading of the New Testament because they're perennialists. And you should find out how perennialists read the New Testament, because they don't affirm that the New Testament teaches the Trinity, the incarnation, and this sort of thing. But again, they're part of a minority opinion. Now, I sort of don't remember exactly what else you were saying before. I did say Surah 5 is about legal matters. Now, the question of how is a Christian in the time of Muhammad supposed to understand what the legal teachings are? Well, it's very simple, okay? He goes into whatever he has. He finds the words of Jesus. Jesus has legal teachings. Any legal teaching that's consistent with what the Quran says, specifically Surah 5, they would follow. And they are allowed to follow their own legal teachings. The Jews are allowed to follow their own legal teachings, because the Quran, from a governance perspective, is quite a pluralistic document. It doesn't want to force Jews and Christians to follow the law of Prophet Muhammad, so it allows them to follow the laws that they have. Now, as for this term Muhayman in the Quran, again, Nikolai Sinai represents an academic critical perspective, and when he says Muhayman means the arbiter, that's from that perspective. The study Quran people are representing a perennialist perspective, which is the minority view that the New Testament or the 4 Gospels are preserved, and they're entitled to their opinion. But theirs is not an academic opinion. Theirs is a partisan opinion. And if you want to follow their partisan opinion, that's fine, Sam. But you still have to then deal with this other issue of the interpretation of the Torah that you have, the interpretation of the New Testament, because there's a lot of academic scholarship that would say that the Trinitarian reading of the New Testament is just not historically true, that this is just a later back projection onto the text. Similarly, your Trinitarian reading of Genesis, where you say there's 2 Yahwehs in Genesis 19, right? We can talk about that if you want. I think it's a very tenuous reading. But this, for your dilemma to work, you have to A, show that the Quran affirms the New Testament, which it does not. It only affirms the gospel of Jesus, okay? And B, you also have to show on your own, once you've brought a Muslim to the Bible, okay, you also have to show that the New Testament teaches the core doctrines that you believe in as a Christian, which, even if I grant you your canon, I would be able to dispute with you on the Trinity, on the incarnation, on vicarious atonement, and all these other matters. So that's why, for all these different reasons, I don't think the Islamic dilemma in the end is successful, especially for educated people.
Okay. Now let's turn to Q&A now, and we're gonna have.
Cameron, can I just not respond? I would love to engage you, but Andani, you understand from my perspective, because I'm not an academic. Hopefully one day I'll be educated. I prefer exegesis. So if you want to engage me on the Bible, please, let's not appeal to academic scholarship. Let's do exegesis. And then I'll be more than happy to discuss with you whether Genesis talks about 2 Yahwehs or not. But if you're going to quote scholars, you can quote them. They mean nothing to me. So if you want to meet me on my turf, let's do exegesis. And we can even discuss Muhaymanin exegetically and see what the word means, doesn't mean. I'll be more than happy. But if it's scholarship,
okay. Let's move on. Sorry, we've got to move on. We've got to move on.
Exegesis, my
yes. Contextually, sorry.
All right, I've muted both of you guys. We got to move on, do some Q&A. All right, I'll unmute you guys. So what I want to do, because there's an opportunity here to just speak past each other and go way too long. We've got a lot of super chats we need to get to. So let's do 2-minute responses, whoever it is addressed to, and then a 1-minute counter response, and that's it. Okay, no more responses past that.
How many do
So
you have?
whoever
By
it's
the way?
addressed to, do what?
How many do you have? Because I want to know how much time you got. Because I have to also discuss with someone. You got
Minutes of a response, and then Khalil will get a 1-minute response. Wrote the Pentateuch.
Testament writers, irrespective of what modern critical scholarship says. That's why I'm not impressed with modern critical scholarship. Simple and to the point.
All right, that was easy. All right, Khalil, anything to say in response?
Look, I think that not only does modern scholarship doubt that Moses wrote the Pentateuch, but even if we put that aside and we do our own exegesis, if we open up the Pentateuch and we find all the mentions of Moses writing something, it'll never actually say Moses wrote the Pentateuch. The only thing it says is that Moses wrote down the law or the Torah, and that's referring to specific laws that you'll find in, say, Deuteronomy, maybe in Exodus. But you'll never find anything in the Pentateuch itself that says Moses wrote 5 books or that Moses even wrote the book of Genesis. So I know Sam doesn't care about scholarship, but I care, and I think your audience cares about scholarship. There's a scholar, Professor Ralston, professor of Semitic languages at George Washington University, and he has an online article which is very good. He actually says that the Pentateuch itself does not present itself as being written by Moses, but as an anonymous account about the history of the world. And he's not going by this sort of secular stuff that Sam doesn't like. He's saying, look, if we picked up the Pentateuch and we read it on its own terms, we wouldn't find that Moses wrote it.
All right, let's move on to the next question. Another question from Bobby. How can, and this one I think is addressed to Sam, how can the New Testament be considered reliable if early manuscripts?
I think a strong internal argument as well on the point of Moses, peace be upon him, not writing the Pentateuch is that it mentions Moses' death, right? But obviously, I still would consider generally the Pentateuch as like containing truth and it to be considered part of the Torah in the sense of being Jewish scripture, but not the Torah in the sense of what was given to Moses, peace be upon him. So the Torah given to Moses would be the law, including other terms like sorts of revelations. But the Pentateuch itself could be a later revealed type of revelation that was given to like another prophet or like some tradition that was passed on about Moses' life or what was occurring at the time with the Israelites.
Scripts contain numerous alterations in key doctrinal passages and later additions or interpolations.
Yeah, you're asking the right question for the wrong debate. I can grant the fact, and I want Khalil to hear me carefully, I can grant the fact New Testament's corrupt, and yet the Quran confirmed the New Testament, which means the Quran is wrong. That's the dilemma. If you say the New Testament is full of variations, and Andani, Dr. Andani, I'm not trying to mispronounce your name, he deals with academic scholarship. He's aware of the qirat and the ahruf and the variations. We can have a field day when it comes to variations, but to stick on the topic, if the New Testament manuscripts are corrupt, that means the Quran is false. That's the part of the dilemma. Because if you're a Muslim, you don't have the option, contrary to what Andani says, to say that the New Testament's corrupt and only contains core truth. The Quran doesn't argue that way. The Quran says whatever the Christians and Jews had, that's the uncorrupt, preserved words of God. I'm arguing from the context of the Quran, not from outside sources. So if the New Testament's corrupt, Muhammad is a false prophet. New Testament preserved, Muhammad is a false prophet. Welcome to the wonderful world of the Islamic dilemma.
All right, and Andani, you've got 1 minute.
Yeah, so again, the Quran never authorizes the New Testament. So even if you go beyond the manuscript problem, you have a canonization problem. The New Testament wasn't canonized as 27 books until the 4th century. And then the 4 Gospels are not canonized until, say, the 2nd century. The funny thing is that the Quran doesn't endorse the Christian canon, let alone the preservation of the Christian text. So we have a canon problem to begin with. The only canonical revelation the Quran explicitly authorizes is the gospel taught by Jesus. And the Quran says that the people of the book mixed truth with falsehood. So the New Testament is a mixture of authentic revelation and false interpretation.
All right, let's move on to the next question from Stephen. How does Dr. Andani harmonize Surah 157 and Ibn Ishaq saying that the Gospel of Jesus was written by John, yet John's Gospel contradicts the Quran?
Before I answer, and you start the time, can I put up a slide or no?
Yeah, that is possible. Go ahead and share your screen.
Give me 1 second here. All right. Is this visible?
It's up
All
there,
right.
yep.
Okay, 2 minutes, right? This is the quote of this is the quote of Ibn Ishaq, and I knew this would come up because this is one of Sam's favorite passages. So this is the quote. Ibn Ishaq is apparently quoting the Gospel of John. Okay, he is, but take a look at what is highlighted here. These are 3 places where Ibn Ishaq has actually altered the Gospel of John. Namely, the word Father has been replaced with the word Rabb or Lord. This means Ibn Ishaq did not actually believe the Gospel of John was perfectly preserved, because he actually had to correct the text. This is not just my opinion. Sidney Griffith, who's a Catholic scholar, Sidney Griffith says that Ibn Ishaq firstly subscribes to the Quranic idea of the Gospel, because he speaks of the Gospel in this quote as what was revealed to Jesus, okay? And number two, Sidney Griffith notes that Ibn Ishaq doesn't believe the Gospel of John is fully preserved, because he had to correct the Gospel of John, and Ibn Ishaq did that because Ibn Ishaq follows the Quranic view, which in the view of Sidney Griffith is that the Christians actually have corrupted their scriptures. So Sam, you should really stop using Ibn Ishaq as one of your favorite quotes, because the scholarship doesn't agree with you, and neither does Ibn Ishaq.
Actually, I was prepared to bury Sidney Griffith's comments because I already addressed him. Actually, you're wrong. Ibn Ishaq does what your Quran does to all its sources. This is an indictment against you Muslims. You do the very thing the Quran accuses Jews and Christians. You'll quote the sources of Jews and Christians, but you will not quote them in those aspects where it shows that Muhammad is a false prophet. For example, the Quran will quote the infancy gospel narratives of Jesus, where the baby Jesus talks about him being the word of God, right? And the Son of God sent into the world. But then lo and behold, your Quran comes and changes the words of Jesus, saying, I'm a prophet and slave of Allah. That's an indictment against you Muslims, that you do not find it something against your own standards of integrity and truth to change the wording to make it agree with your theology. And if Ibn Ishaq did not believe that John was authentic, that only buries him. Why? Because
How doesn't he understand that buries him? The fact that the Quran is consciously editing the Quran, the gospel, sorry. The fact that the Quran is consciously editing stuff that the Christians have in their possession. that completely decimates this whole view that he's trying to say, that the Quran absolutely confirms what the Christians have. How does he notice this? It's one thing that Ibn Ishaq does it. Okay, maybe you could say that Ibn Ishaq is distorting what he's quoting or whatever, but the Quran is from the perspective of what God is saying, right? Oh, is the video okay? Let me try to fix that. Let me try to make it a bit louder. Okay, maybe it's better now. But what I'm saying is that if the Quran is from the perspective of God, and you're granting, obviously you have to grant the presuppositions of the Muslim here, then God is editing consciously what he disagrees with in the position of the Jews and Christians. So it's not wholesale confirmation. I don't know how he doesn't understand that. That's just like a cut to, it's just a complete decimation of his view.
does he know those parts that he didn't change are authentic? Arguing in a circle, and contrary to your assertion, Ibn Ishaq confirms the authority of Scripture. Debate me on it.
All right, from King, Jesus loves you, Sam Shamoun from Malaysia. Very nice. All right, Chris Procession says, it's confirmation bias. Muhammad confirmed a book that contradicts him. Muhammad would have confirmed a Gnostic text if it was there. You think this one's addressed to Khalil?
I don't know if it's a question, but it would be for him, not for me. Because, by the way, he does affirm Neoplatonism, so it's for monasticism. So maybe you want to address it.
Do you want to say anything about this, Khalil, or not?
I mean, we can skip it just in the interest of time. It doesn't matter.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. But I appreciate the super chat, Chris. All right, Michael, is it true that Muhammad had a statue of Mary and Jesus at home? This one we won't time, just anyone who has a response.
That's the topic, it's not relevant.
No, so what we have is there's an early report that when Muhammad went into the Kaaba, it was full of idols, and he ordered all the idols removed, but there was a painting of Abraham, and there was a painting of Jesus and Mary, and according to Ibn Ishaq, he didn't want that to be taken down, so that they left there.
That's where it comes from. Okay. All right. Next one from Brother Jay. What is the Injil? And we'll give this one to Khalil. Take 2 minutes.
Does he have to answer it? He did an entire presentation.
He can take 10 seconds and summarize his view.
We can skip it so we can do more questions. Skip it.
Okay.
It's
fair enough. AC says, is the hidden Injil with the hidden Imam?
What's these questions? I don't understand these questions, man.
Well, again, we can skip it. I don't think it's relevant.
Yeah, it's not relevant.
All right. The Heavy Heart Show. Muhammad was a sloppy plagiarist of the Bible. It's really quite simple.
Yeah, that's if you want to address it, good. I'm not.
You can address it if you want, Khalil, or we can.
We can just skip it. Let's just deal with serious questions. Otherwise, we should.
Yeah, come on, guys. The guy's an academic scholar. Come on, let's be a little more charitable. Anyway.
All we do is only read the Quran, but Muslims read the same text and says, no, it's not saying that. And when they are stuck, they ask for the Arabic. Islamic, Allah only understands Arabic. Imam is false.
Okay. I don't know.
Yeah, let's keep on going.
Yeah, pontificating. I hope most of your chats are like this, so we don't have to ask questions, so me and him can take a break.
Yes, you're the king. Yeah, you guys get a break here. For both, how can corruption or interpretation account for atonement in all Old Testament and New Testament, especially since it's the cornerstone of faith and easy to memorize? Oh, maybe this one for Sam.
Want me to go first? Okay. Well, because I've already heard Andani appeal to academic scholarship saying that the historical Jesus never argued that he would die an atoning sacrifice for the sins of the world. That doesn't come from the authentic gospel of Jesus, even though the very so-called sayings of Jesus that he appealed to, as well as Paul Williams appealed to, you'll find in the sayings of Jesus, not the narrative, the sayings of Jesus, Mark 10:45 and Mark 14:22-25, which modern critical scholarship thinks is the earliest of the Gospels. Jesus talking about offering his soul as a ransom for many, and that this cup is being shed for many. So even in the earliest strata, you have Jesus referring to his death as having sacrificial value to redeem and release and ransom. But now what happens is they'll explain away saying, well, that's not an authentic saying of Jesus. That was interpolated by Mark. But then we're back to the dilemma, because if the Christians were to judge by Mark at the time of Muhammad, because that would be the gospel they had, and they read that as a saying of Jesus, they would believe that this is a teaching of the historical Jesus. So if it's not a teaching of the historical Jesus, that means the Quran is wrong again. So we're back to the Islamic dilemma.
And
Okay,
Khalil, if you
and
got
here's
anything
the
to
way
say?
out of that dilemma. So the Quran explicitly denies that anybody bears the burden of another person or bears the sin of another person. So the Quran as a criterion would show the Christians in the 7th century that Jesus could not have taught that. Furthermore, the academic scholarship on this by James Dunn says that Jesus himself never taught that his death was a vicarious atonement sacrifice. In addition to that, the Christians have a dilemma. Luke Acts nowhere teaches that the death of Jesus is a vicarious atonement for sin. And you believe the author of Luke is an inspired author. So even if Mark taught that it's an atonement for sin, but the fact that Luke doesn't teach that it's an atonement for sin, you have one inspired author in contradiction with another inspired author. And this is the Christian atonement dilemma.
All right, let's move on to the next super chat from Apostate Prophet. Khalil, how do you, hang on, let me see if I can get this looking right. How do you explain that the earliest,
Go ahead, I'm sorry. The debate review after this.
how do you explain that the earliest Christian texts, including the epistles, clearly say that Jesus is the Son of God who died for our sins? That's number one. Number two, what is the Injil, the good news? What exactly did Jesus promise?
So maybe the earliest extant Christian texts do teach that. I think Paul did teach that, and some of the epistles do. But the early Jewish Christians, led by James, the brother of Jesus, they did not believe that Jesus died for sins. In fact, Jesus himself didn't believe it. And as I said, the author of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, he doesn't believe that Jesus died for sins. And one other.
Also, there's a case to be made in Luke as well, where the women do come to the disciples and say that Jesus was resurrected. They reply with that pretty much what they said is nonsense. Like it's something that's not believable to them. But if Jesus was actually preaching in the Gospels his death and resurrection to come, why would they say that it's nonsense, and that they would be happy at the fact that they've heard that he's been resurrected? This is what he's been prophesying this whole time. So why would they deem it to be nonsense and something that is completely foreign to them? So that's another type of argument you can make to show that his death and resurrection wasn't taught historically.
Other corroboration of that is the early Jewish Christians, after the resurrection of Jesus, they continued to practice the Torah. They continued to go to the temple and offer sacrifices there. But if Jesus' death was an atoning sacrifice for sins, why would the early Jewish Christians, after Jesus' resurrection, continue the Torah and continue temple sacrifice to the point they even forced Paul to perform a Nazarite by sacrifice? So there's an inconsistency. As for the term, Jesus is the Son and God, I don't have time to discuss it here, but I would dispute that the Gospels actually teach that Jesus is God.
Now, notice, ironically, he quotes Luke, who wrote Acts, to tell you that the Jews continue to observe temple sacrifices, but that's the same Luke and Acts that present Jesus and his followers as affirming the divine sonship of Jesus Christ. So he wants his cake and eat it too. And secondly, you just argued from silence. To say that Luke did not mention the atonement is not the same as saying he denied the atonement. As an academic, you don't want to make these leaps in logic because that's a logical fallacy. And thirdly, you're wrong. In Luke 22:19-20, and Acts 20:28, there we're told that Jesus will shed his blood for the new covenant, which is for the forgiveness of sins. So stop parroting Bart Ehrman, who's been refuted, and stay current with current scholarship. So you're wrong. And if it is corrupted, the Quran is wrong, because it's telling Christians to judge by that gospel. The only gospel they had is the New Testament, which means, again, the Quran is wrong and Muhammad is a false prophet. Can't have your cake and eat it too. I'm sorry, Andani.
All right, let's move on to Tish Soto. Who wrote the Injil? I guess this one's for Khalil.
Well,
You can
originally,
take as much time as you want.
Yeah, so the Injil is the teaching of Jesus, and from a historical perspective, that's literally the name of what he taught. And we know for about a century or so, according to modern scholarship, the early Christians had a more oral conception of Jesus' teaching. So Jesus' teachings were passed on orally. That's what Q basically is, right? And then at some later point, the Jesus tradition is sort of written down, and these Jesus sayings are sort of transmitted in writing at some point. And then the anonymous gospel authors, they pick up these Jesus sayings and they have a narrative that they'd heard orally, and they put it in writing. So the Injil from a historical perspective and even from a Quranic perspective, it is an oral revelation. It's not a physical book.
Guys, you see the circle of reasoning again? How do you know that Jesus preached the gospel and what it is? Oh, because of the gospels, which are corrupt and unreliable and anonymous. So you trust the gospels to tell you that Jesus preached the gospel, but when the gospels then tell you that Jesus also made statements, or they make statements about Jesus that Shamoun was a false prophet, oh, that's where it's corrupt. Moreover, how does he know about Q? Q is extrapolated from the material found in Matthew and Luke. So if Matthew and Luke are reliable enough to give you Q, then why are they unreliable in other areas where they show that Jesus proclaims his sacrificial death, his divine sonship? And moreover, there's a saying in Q, Matthew 11:27, Luke 10:22, where Jesus says, all things have been handed to me by my Father. No one knows who the Father is except the Son, and no one knows who the Son is except the Father, and to whom the Son reveals him. That saying from Q, which predates the Gospels, shows that Islam is false and Muhammad is a false prophet. Can't have your cake and eat it too, Andani.
All right. Next one from David. For Khalil, why hold Q, the Quran, I suppose, is not affirming the New Testament? What if the Quran author was mistaken, thinking the New Testament was given to Jesus? Seems to assume divine authorship. So maybe saying that you're kind of begging the question here.
Well, you don't even need to say that. Like, it's so uncharitable to say that the Quranic author can't distinguish between the New Testament and the Gospels, and yet is able to quote the Gospels as well as edit it, as well as not just the Gospels but the apocryphal Gospels as well. You don't need to beg the question for that. Just have to put it within its own historical context. Quite absurd to say that from an unbiased perspective, whether presupposing a Muslim perspective or an antagonistic Christian perspective, just from an unbiased point of view, to say that the Quran can't distinguish between the New Testament and the Gospels, I don't know. I don't find that very convincing. Quite uncharitable.
Yeah, so again, if the Islamic dilemma is an internal critique, which I said at the beginning that it is an internal critique and it's only presented to believing Muslims, then a Muslim can assume the Quran is from God, and they can simply say, okay, how does the Quran define the Injil? But frankly, even if we put that aside, you can do an academic investigation of how does the Quran define the Injil, and you don't end up with the New Testament. So I don't even have to assume divine authorship for what is the Quranic conception of the Injil, just like a lot of scholars ask, what is the Quranic concept of kitab? And Daniel Madigan, he applies a principle of charity. He's a Catholic priest. He says, look, if we want to know what kitab means in the Quran, we should read the Quran holistically. We shouldn't just assume the Quran is a disjointed, incoherent text. You only would conclude that a text is incoherent if all the possibilities of a coherent reading are impossible or completely nullified. But in the case of the Injil, we have a coherent notion of what the Injil is in the Quran, and it doesn't comport with any definition of the New Testament, which Sam still has to prove. It's been about 3 hours. I'm still waiting for the Quranic mention of the 27 books of the New Testament.
And I'm still waiting for you to show me the Quran, where the Quran says how many surahs make up the Quran and how many verses make up each surah of the Quran. It's not in the Quran. Therefore, if you're going to follow that criteria, how do you know what the Quran is? The Quran doesn't tell you. Stop arguing from silence. That's a bad way of responding and refuting and proving your case. Moreover, I did more than that. I showed you the Quran says whatever revelation they had, that is the uncorrupt revelations of God. And they had the New Testament, whether you like it or not. Even you admit that the Quran is aware of the New Testament, interacts with it. Again, it's like you want to have your cake and eat it too. And finally, it's irrelevant what modern 21st century academic scholarship says. Unless you think the Quran is irrelevant, it wasn't meant for that time period. It was only meant for you scholars today. So if that's the case, the Quran was revealed in the wrong time period. Allah should have sent it down in the 21st century for you scholars. You have to answer what it means in its historical context. And I've given you context within the Quran and outside sources, and your case has been soundly refuted. There is a dilemma. The Quran confirms the Bible and yet denies its core doctrines, which means Muhammad's a false prophet. Come home to Jesus, and then he's waiting.
All right, next one from another one from David. For Khalil, Reynolds argues the Quran didn't possess knowledge to know this difference, how Jews, Christians, and the Quran author envisage these scriptures. What is your opinion?
Well, that's for him, right?
That's for him. It looks like his internet connection kind of went in and out. Yeah.
That's fine. What was the question?
Feel free.
How many more do you
have? We have a lot. We're only about a third
way through. All of them? Because I know.
I don't know if Gabriel Reynolds said that about the Torah. I know he did say that about the Injil. I'm not sure about the Torah, but regardless, like I don't agree with what Gabriel says in that. I mean, I don't take Gabriel Reynolds as a very serious Islamic scholar. Already recently, he made the mistake of saying that the preserved tablet, according to early Islam, people believe that the preserved tablet was eternal. Like, I don't treat Gabriel Reynolds as someone that's serious. I don't think his opinions are very compelling, especially on the part of the Injil. I don't agree with his view.
Oh, you gotta be out of here.
We'll get as many as we can.
How many more minutes?
Khalil, are you back? Can you hear us?
Yeah, it just sometimes this happens. So I got
Okay,
kicked
no
out.
worries.
Sam's argument was too powerful. It booted me out of the room.
Oh,
Too scary. All right. So Reynolds argues, he's talking about Gabriel Said Reynolds, argues that the Quran didn't possess knowledge to know this difference, how Jews, Christians, and the Quran author envisage the scriptures. What is your opinion?
So I've shown you in my slideshow that based on the scholarship we have, and Sam, the reason why I cite scholarship is you just said in your prior comment before I got booted, you have to read the Quran in its historical context. Yeah, I agree. That's what scholarship does. That's what the whole field of Quranic studies does, just like biblical studies reads the Bible in its historical context. So the scholarship that reads the Quran in its historical context has concluded that the Quran is quite familiar with some very fine details within the Bible, within the Old Testament and New Testament. So based on, say, the findings of Imran al-Badawi, which shows the Quran interacts with the Gospels, even at a textual level, I think the author of the Quran does know what Jews and Christians think about their scriptures, and it knows to the extent where the Quran can correctly identify that their scriptures that they have are a mix of, man-made revelation and actual revelation. And this is a conclusion that modern scholarship only until recently corroborated when it tells us that Moses didn't really write the Pentateuch, right? Jesus didn't actually say everything that is attributed to Jesus in the New Testament. The Quran is already saying this in a religious context 1400 years ago, and now modern scholarship, much of whom is by Christians, is saying the same thing. So contrary to the Islamic dilemma, a lot of modern scholarship is a confirmation of certain Quranic critiques of the scriptural corpus of Jews and Christians. And I think the reason why Sam doesn't like to cite scholarship is because most of the scholarship would go against his own beliefs.
now I noticed that he wants to respond to my response. We can do this all day, but I'm going to address what you just said. Contrary to what you just asserted, I also appeal to modern scholarship, but I don't swear by them because they're not my prophets or my messengers or my rightly guided imams. They can be mistaken. So no, I have quoted scholars, but at the same time, you have to go to the Quran itself. And if you want to now know how the Quran was understood historically, you don't start with 21st century scholarship. You have to see how the Quran is being defined and explained and see if there's a consensus or they're all over the map. So again, I don't deny the importance of scholarship, but you swear by scholarship and you live by it. It's like they are your rightly guided imams. But more than that, you keep saying that Moses didn't write the bulk of the Pentateuch because he wrote in the third person. Well, that means Allah did not inspire the Quran because Allah speaks of himself in the third person. That means Jesus could not have uttered the words attributed to him in the Gospels because he speaks of himself in the third person. See, this is what happens when you blindly follow scholarship and not see how people spoke and wrote in their historical context.
All right, David sent in another one, but we're going to move on to another super chat here from the Heavy Heart Show. The Quran can't be read holistically because it is full of contradictions. It's not an option. Khalil, I guess that's for you.
I mean, we should just skip this. This is not even a question. It's just an assertion. So
yeah, let's get to the
all right.
question.
Yeah, this next one's not a question either. I'll still put it on the screen. People can read it if they'd like to. All right, this one is a question for Khalil. Does the scientific miracle, that's not on topic. We might as well skip that one. Yeah, let's keep on going here.
I think you only have 13 more minutes, huh? Brother Cameron, you got to head out, right?
We'll see. Yeah. I've got 13 minutes. I can go a little bit past that, maybe 5 or 10 past that. So we'll get to as many as we can.
You don't mind if I go off camera, right? Or walk around, right? As I listen, because I'll be listening.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
All right, go ahead.
That's fine.
This is for me, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think this one's for you. The topic is the Islamic dilemma, not the Christian dilemma. Stop being up the 27 books and stick to the topic.
Okay.
Not a question, but
all right. Okay, I think it's for me. I'll take your advice. I repent. I'll make Toba, I guess. Is he down to me, right? I guess it's not to you, it's to me.
No, I think it's Khalil.
I think it's for me. No, so I'll try to be quick. The reason why I have to bring it up is because premise 1 of the Islamic dilemma says the Quran confirms the divine inspiration, authority, and preservation of the New Testament. Now, the New Testament is a library of 27 books that were canonized in the 4th century, over 300 years after Jesus. So my solution to the Islamic dilemma is to attack premise 1. And that's basically what I do. I show that there's no positive case in the Quran that affirms premise 1, basically. And then what the Quran does affirm, which is just the gospel of Jesus, that definition or concept of gospel doesn't match a 27-book canon. So I didn't call that premise 1 refutation the Christian dilemma. I just refer to the fact that the burden of proof is on the Christian to show that the Quran affirms a 27-book New Testament canon, which it clearly does not. Once that premise is destroyed, the Islamic dilemma basically collapses onto itself. And the thing is that a Christian like Sam has no way of even validating the 27-book canon as being from God except by appealing to circularity. Sam has to say that the 27 books are true revelation because the church said it. But then if I ask him to prove the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, he's going to have to appeal to arguments out of the 27 books. So he has to presuppose the 27 books are from God. So that then leads to a sort of a Christian circularity dilemma. But that's not what I was arguing during the presentation.
No, actually, I'll appeal to the Quran if I'm speaking to a Muslim, because according to chapter 3, verse 55, 61:14, if you believe the Quran is divine and you believe Allah cannot lie, he swore that the followers of Jesus would be victorious, and he gave them victory, and they dominated over them believers, and he'd empower them to be victorious till the day of resurrection. So if the Quran is true, then the true church prevailed, and the true church looks nothing like Islam, because the true church held to the 27 books of the New Testament and the books of the Old Testament and affirmed the Trinity. And you actually proved my case. Guys, I want you to keep hearing what he says. It wasn't until the 4th century the New Testament canon was finalized. Well, by the time
Man, I hate it whenever he quotes that verse about the early Christians, the Nasara, the early followers of Jesus and the disciples, they were victorious. I mean, this is exactly what the Quran says. They take ambiguous verses and they run away with them, and they ignore the clear verses, right? And anyways, we have early Mufassirun that talk about this, talking about them being victorious, not in terms of population or dominance physically, but rather in terms of being triumphant in terms of evidences and proofs. This is like mentioned in Tabari and others.
Muhammad, that means they knew what the canon was. And since Muhammad is appealing to his contemporaries, not to the 4th century, his contemporaries would know when he says, you are to uphold the Torah and the gospel, all the revelation given to you, means that you uphold your New Testament, because that's God's word. But if we do that, Muhammad is a false prophet and antichrist. And I'm not saying disrespect, I'm just saying theologically, and he has to go. That's why the Islamic dilemma. So thank you for making my case again. I'll just use your Quran to make my case. It's acceptable.
All right. This next one is not a question, but I'm going to read it out, and then if anyone wants to comment, feel free. This one was a very substantial super chat. The secular Jewish and Christian scholarship of Larry Hurtado, Metzger, Andrei Orlov, Hengel, Boyarin, Schaefer, Siegel, etc., is well received and destroys the deconstructionist nonsense Muslims, atheists, and Gnostics go to as the academic consensus.
This is more about powers in heaven, so it's not a relevant topic. He's talking about scholarship. Talks about the 2 powers in heaven, where you have, because Daniel Boyarin and Larry Hurtado are known for what the early Christians believed and how Jewish views of 2 powers in heaven were deemed heretical later on. I don't really think it's relevant, but unless Professor wants to address it. This is about the 2 powers in heaven, which we hopefully, God willing, will have a discussion on in the future.
We didn't talk about that today, so we can skip it.
Yeah. So at this point, I am going to have to be a little bit more selective with these super chats. I do want to thank everyone for sending them in, but I will have to kind of go through and just try to select ones that are going to be relevant for the rest of the program. So Apostate Prophet sends one, and he says, why in the world would Jews and Christians rely on Muhammad and Islam to decide what is and is not authentic in their own text? Isn't my book decides which parts of your book are authentic a clear fallacy? Why don't we give this one to...
Bro, Apostate Prophet is so slow, man. I guess he didn't watch the debate, because the only time where the Quran actually does state for the Jews and Christians to judge by their books is in the context of when the Prophet is asked on what they should judge by, right? And that's obviously offering the Quranic perspective. So yeah, like anyways, as I said at the beginning, this isn't even the Islamic dilemma. The fact that the Quran is circular on the part of what is the Injil and the Torah, when making an argument for the Christians and Jews to implement it. It being circular here has it's got nothing to do with the Islamic dilemma. The Islamic dilemma is that the Quran confirms the Bible while not knowing that it contradicts the Quran.
Sam, to answer first.
Yeah, well, to represent to Steelman, Professor Andani's position, he's actually saying that in response to us, we're saying that the Quran confirms the Old and New Testament scriptures and yet contradicts those scriptures, and therefore the Quran must be false. His response is, no, it doesn't. For a Muslim who believes in the Quran is the criterion for them to determine which parts of the previous revelations remain intact or corrupt, and therefore the Quran is ultimate authority for them. So I'm trying to Steelman his position. So again, that was the debate. Does it only affirm parts of the Bible or all of it? And does it acknowledge the New Testament or not? That was the debate. So I hope I did a good job representing your position.
Khalil, if you got anything to say in response, feel free.
Yeah, so I would simply say that for starters, just to answer the question, Surah 5 says that Jews and Christians came to Muhammad to obtain legal rulings. That's like that whole section of Surah 5 is about that. Now, why did they come to him in the first place? It's not historically clear why, but they did. So the Quranic answer to the Jews and Christians who don't follow Muhammad religiously, they probably follow him politically, and they said they wanted to give legal rulings. The Quran said, look, like for your legal rulings, you should go to the laws that you have, basically. And the Quran authenticates these laws because it actually cites laws that are still found in the extant Old Testament and New Testament. So again, the Quran is validating parts of the Christian and Jewish canon, but not the whole. But my question is, there's nothing illogical about an author agreeing with a portion of another author and disagreeing with the other portion. As an academic, like we do this all the time, and no one accuses me of being in an academic dilemma to do that.
All right, next one from Mike Q. Didn't the Christian monks who supposedly encountered Muhammad have the 27 New Testament books and all Old Testament books as revealed revelation? God bless him again.
So for me,
I think that's for Khalil. Yeah, Khalil.
So, I mean, we don't have a lot of historical data on who these Christian monks were. The Christians at the time had a canon, although, as you know, Orthodox, later Protestants, Catholics, they had not finalized a canon until much later, right? But there is a canon. The thing is, the New Testament doesn't exist in Arabic. So in Arabia, the New Testament is not some available book. It's not like the 27-book volume that's floating around over there at the time. So it's not even included in sort of what Muhammad's immediate audience has with them at the time. What they have is more preaching, sermons, notes, this sort of thing. So yeah, that's just from a historical perspective. But then the Quran itself, although it knows the content of the New Testament, it never comes out and affirms that New Testament. And that's why, to me, there's just not enough data points to argue for premise one of the Islamic dilemma. And once you can't argue for premise one, there is no more Islamic dilemma. And if you could argue a lower premise one, maybe the Quran affirms the four Gospels, then we can have another discussion of, do the four Gospels actually teach the Trinity, which I don't think they do. I don't even think they teach the divinity of Jesus. But we can do that next time.
Yep. In response, notice again, he acknowledges. I want you to hear this acknowledgement. The Quran is aware of the New Testament, interacts with it, but his only complaint is it doesn't come out and say the New Testament or say 27 books. But that's an argument from silence. It's like me saying, well, the Quran doesn't mention what the Quran is, how many surahs will make up the Quran, how many verses each surah is composed thereof. That's not in the Quran. So therefore, how do you know that everything that you claim is the Quran is actually the Quran? See, that's not a good way of arguing, because we're going by the positive statement. Since he acknowledges they had the New Testament, and since the Quran comes to confirm what is with them and exhorts them to behold what they had, ipso facto, the Quran confirms the New Testament. Game over. Islamic dilemma has been confirmed. We can have a discussion on the Gospels, and I'll show you the Trinity from the Gospels.
Yeah, what Sam doesn't understand is that the Quran could have quoted the New Testament, could have utilized parts of the New Testament, but it doesn't, proving that it's not confirming the New Testament. It merely confirms parts of the Gospels, not the New Testament. So, yeah, an argument from silence here is effective, because you would expect there to be evidence where the Quran is confirming parts of the New Testament. So arguments from silence aren't not inherently fallacious. In this case, it can be used.
Gospels.
Yeah, this next one is actually on that topic, so feel free to go into it if you want. If the canon was added to so much, how come there is first century explicit and implicit reference to Christ as God, two powers theology, proto-trinity, and the Didache? Paul appeals to this as though already extant.
Can we defer to a future discussion on that, on the Didache?
We can absolutely do that. I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity.
We can do that. If we can agree, maybe the Gospels, yeah.
Fair enough. Let me scoot down and get to another question that I saw down here that is actually on topic. According to John, is this person, Khalil, the Islamic dilemma is not exactly a critique of Islam as such, but of the Quran, which becomes a problem for Islam. You can't assume the Quran is coherent a priori.
Precisely.
Actually, you do assume that any text under analysis, you offer it the principle of charity. We do this with every text. If we assume that the Quran is incoherent a priori, then that, like, it's a foregone conclusion. It's just special pleading. So what we have to be open to is the fact that any text is internally coherent, and then we analyze the text and we come up with different possibilities. So some interpretations lead to an internally coherent text. Some interpretations lead to an incoherent text. And when you have a possibility of a coherent text and there's a basis for that, then you can easily go with that. Right? The only way the Islamic dilemma can actually work is if you separate the Quran into different bits, and then you read each bit independent of the other bit. So as I said, some verses say the Quran confirms what is with them, but another verse says the prophet confirms what God gave the prophets. So that's a specification of what is with them. And then other verses explicitly disconfirm beliefs that are with the Christians. What I do is I read all of this together, because they're often...
Exactly. And that point of they were holding corrupt stuff in their hands. They distorted what was in their hands, and they misplaced stuff that was in their hands. And yet the Quran is saying it's confirming what's in their hands, shows you that there's a level of specification here. Not everything that they literally have in their hands is from Allah. They wrote books with their own hands and said it was from Allah. They covered verses, they hid verses, they misplaced verses, and so on. So the Quran is quite clear. They mix falsehood, they mix truth with falsehood, and they had that at their disposal. But obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not confirming the falsehood that they have.
Part of the same chapter. What Sam does is he reads all of these in isolation, and he says bit A of the Quran contradicts bit B of the Quran. Now, he's free to do that, but as an academic and as like a neutral party, we would always apply the principle of charity. And that's how I would read, the Gospel of Mark as one text, or the Gospel of Luke as one text. Like, nobody would make this sort of argument with the Bible, because I think we can be much more charitable as Muslims to other books. We don't try to find like these artificial contradictions, which is what the Islamic dilemma tries to do.
I don't think you're super familiar with contemporary dawah, Khalil. There's a lot of interesting things out there. I'm just joking around. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Sam.
Thanks for coming off, Cameron. Is he paying you?
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Eventually, I'm going to lose weight like you. Well, anyway, notice, and then his argument, he assumes the Quran. He assumes what the Quran is. He assumes how many chapters make up the Quran. He assumes that these chapters consist of X number of verses in order to assume that it needs to be read charitably and try to see that it's consistent, not assume that it's inconsistent. But that's begging the question. You have to assume the Quran in order to apply the principle of charity of the Quran. But how do you know what the Quran is? Because your entire argument is the Quran never mentions the New Testament. Well, the Quran never.
For what? This is an internal critique. So, okay, the fact that Christians have to presuppose the univac, bro, oh my days, this would actually absolutely cut him if he was consistent. As a Christian, you have to presuppose the universality of the Bible in order for you to reconcile, I don't know, countless contradictions. Judas's death, for example. You have the contradiction in terms of even theological aspects found in the Gospels, right? You need to use ad hoc reasoning and presupposing universality and the fact that they're God breathed in order for you to reconcile this. Does that mean that you're not justified in doing so? Like, oh my God, this is complete double standards. Him not appreciating the fact that he's doing an eternal critique here, even though like Kilo mentioned it countless times already.
Never mentions what the Quran is. So how do you know this surah is meant to go with these surahs? And I know these verses are actually part of that surah because if we go with outside source of the Quran, in fact, one of your arguments is this, that 7:157, though a Meccan surah, was actually added to chapter 7 during the Medinan period. So how do you know these verses are coherent if you just go to the Quran internally? And when you talk about charity, you've been anything but charitable to the New Testament. You assume it's corrupted, it's anonymous,
That's
hasn't been
time. All right, that's going to do it for us tonight. Unfortunately, we had a lot more super chats that came in, but I think most of them are off topic. Very interesting questions, and I really appreciate you guys sending them in. They do help the ministry, but unfortunately, we just don't have time. We both got to go. Khalil, I'm sure, probably has.
But yeah, if anyone wants to come up for like the last 5-10 minutes or so, I'll put the link here. But yeah, that's it for today, inshallah. It's really late where I'm at. I'm gonna have to actually go pray Fajr. So if anyone wants to come up, say their thoughts on the debate, I got about 5-10 minutes or so. Sam's critique must also presuppose that the Quran. Yes, funny. Yeah, that's true. Do Muslims claim that Quran teaches how many surahs in the Quran? No, but you Christians claim Quran confirms the New Testament. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You assume it's corrupted, and anonymous Christian scholars say that. Yeah, it's not an assumption. There's evidence for that. There's internal evidence for that. Okay. So if no one's gonna come up, I'm just gonna end the live here, inshallah. But yeah, I got plenty of videos coming up soon, inshallah. We have a video on Bishop Marimari, a response video to an atheist on the scientific miracles in the Quran. I'm going to be presenting my own version of, the whole scientific miracles narrative. And inshallah, there will be other videos uploaded as well. Also, I have a friend of mine who's a revert talking about his story, his journey to Islam. I have it on my community post if you want to check it out. And advise you guys to go subscribe and like his recent video. But yeah, if no one's gonna come up, we will end this here, inshallah. Barakallah feek deen. Keep up the great work for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakallah khair. Wa iyyak. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Super Mario. A couple people caught on to that. How's your English so good? I mean, I'm not foreign. Like, I was born in the West. I don't think it's that good. He didn't really bring arguments except Aisha, and he said that he will make a video against Islam bringing arguments. You sound like an Arab? Yeah, like I'm ethnically an Arab, but I'm ethnically an Arab, but I was born in the West. Dean, can I VC in Discord, inshallah? Quite busy, but inshallah, like, just add me. My at's my YouTube at Dean Response. Sam's entire career has been built off the fact that he knows a bit of Arabic. He does have a lot of familiarity with Islamic sources. That's it. I mean, yeah, like he's been doing it for decades, so you'd expect that. Okay, inshallah. Sounds good. Dean, I was talking about a channel called F3. He made a video saying why he converted to Christianity from Islam. Oh, really? He from Islam? I saw that he commented saying that he came from, or he converted to Christianity, but yeah, it'll be interesting to look at that. But that'll probably be like very low on my priority list in terms of content. I think I got a bunch of other videos I want to do before that. He seems to not have been growing up religious. He celebrated Christmas and Halloween, and also didn't even know shirk is in the yeah, that's sad. I'll definitely make a video on it then. Like, I wouldn't be harsh or anything, obviously. Just, I don't know, just give him rational reasons on why Christianity isn't true and why he should remain Muslim. I think even if you disagree, the fresh and fit debate didn't go the best way. You brought out Sam once again to many Muslims who don't watch him overall. I think was a greater overall. I think it was a greater good. I don't see that as a greater good though. The fact that Sam's more exposed to people now. People forgot about him for a while. He wasn't mainstream anymore. Did he really ever make a video about independent reason why Islam is true? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking later down the line. Right now, I'm trying to focus on like responding to atheists, responding specifically to why Christianity is false, and responding to criticisms against Islam. And last, obviously, I'll say reasons why I believe Islam is true. And I'll make a series on that, inshallah. But definitely, that's on the list of stuff. But yeah, guys, I'm gonna end it here. If no one wants to come up, I'll end the live here, inshallah. And I'll see you guys in the next video, which will be uploaded tomorrow. At the usual timing. So it'll be about 1 a.m. my time, Australian Sydney time. So okay, we'll end the live here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.